Hello friends. Did you know nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy these stories, please hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It really helps. Thank you for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. The Kansas plains stretched endlessly before Bartholomew's windshield that October night in 2021. Nothing but wheat stubble and darkness for miles in every direction. He'd been hauling freight across these desolate highways for nearly 2 decades, but something about this particular run felt different from the moment he'd left the distribution center in Wichita. The cargo manifest showed 40,000 pounds of electronics equipment bound for Denver, and dispatch had insisted on the rural route through western Kansas instead of the usual Interstate 70 corridor. Bartholomew adjusted his worn baseball cap and took another sip of lukewarm coffee from his thermos, the bitter taste doing little to shake the unease that had settled in his stomach 3 hours into the drive. At 57 years old, he'd developed what most truckers called road sense, that inexplicable ability to feel when something wasn't quite right. Tonight, that sense was screaming at him like a tornado siren. The CB radio crackled with static, occasionally picking up fragments of conversation from other drivers somewhere out in the darkness. But for the most part, Highway 50 through western Kansas was living up to its reputation as one of the loneliest stretches of asphalt in America. Nothing but empty fields, abandoned farmhouses, and the occasional grain elevator breaking the monotony of the horizon. It was approaching midnight when Bartholomew first noticed the headlights in his mirrors. 2 sets, maintaining a steady distance about a quarter-mile back. Not unusual in itself. Plenty of traffic moved through these parts at night. Mostly other truckers trying to make good time while the roads were clear. But these vehicles weren't trucks. From what he could tell in the darkness, they looked like SUVs, maybe Suburbans or Tahoes, running close together like they were traveling as a unit. He'd been watching them for the past 20 minutes, and they'd matched his speed perfectly. When he pushed the Peterbilt up to 75, they stayed right with him. When he eased back to 65 to test them, they fell back accordingly, maintaining that exact same distance. Professional drivers didn't behave that way. You either passed or you fell back to your own comfortable speed. You didn't shadow another vehicle for miles unless you had a reason. The nearest town was still 30 miles ahead, a little place called Cimarron that would be buttoned up tight at this hour anyway. Behind him was nothing but 60 miles of empty highway back to Dodge City. Bartholomew reached for his cell phone, thinking maybe he should call his dispatcher, let someone know his location. But out here in the dead zone of western Kansas, the signal bars showed nothing. The phone was as useful as a paperweight. He tried the CB again, switching to channel 19, the standard trucker frequency. Breaker 19, this is Big Bar westbound on Highway 50, about 40 miles east of Cimarron. Anybody got their ears on? Static whispered back at him. Then, faintly, a voice emerged from the white noise. Copy that, Big Bar. This is Midnight Runner, about 10 miles ahead of you westbound. What's your 20? Before Bartholomew could respond, his CB went completely dead. Not static, not interference, just absolute silence. Like someone had pulled the plug. He reached down and checked the connections, but everything was secure. The radio had power. The channel display still glowed green, but it was like the antenna had been severed or jammed. The headlights behind him suddenly accelerated, closing the distance rapidly. Bartholomew's hands tightened on the steering wheel as he watched them split apart, one set moving into the left lane to come alongside him. As the first SUV pulled even with his cab, he got a good look at it in the amber glow of his running lights. Black Suburban, windows tinted so dark he couldn't see inside. No license plate on the front, which wasn't required in Kansas, but something about the vehicle's aggressive positioning made Bartholomew's military training from 35 years ago kick in. The Suburban maintained position right beside him, matching his speed exactly. The second one had moved up close behind his trailer, probably no more than 10 feet off his bumper. Classic boxing maneuver. They were trying to control his movement, limit his options. But why? The electronics in his trailer were valuable, sure, but not worth this kind of coordinated effort. Unless they knew something he didn't about what he was actually hauling. A third set of headlights appeared in his mirrors, coming up fast from behind. This one was different. High-mounted lights that suggested a pickup truck rather than an SUV. It weaved between lanes as it approached, the driver obviously in a hurry. For a brief moment, Bartholomew felt relief. Maybe this would spook whoever was in those Suburbans, make them think twice about whatever they were planning. The pickup truck, a heavy-duty Dodge Ram from what Bartholomew could see, suddenly swerved hard into the left lane and accelerated past the trailing Suburban. But instead of continuing past, it pulled directly in front of the SUV that was running alongside Bartholomew's cab. Brake lights flared red in the darkness as the pickup slowed dramatically, forcing the Suburban to hit its brakes hard to avoid a collision. Bartholomew didn't need a better invitation. He pressed the accelerator, and the Peterbilt's engine roared as 18 wheels churned against the asphalt. The big rig surged forward, breaking free from the box formation. In his mirrors, he saw the Suburban that had been tailgating him swerve to avoid the sudden acceleration of his trailer. The pickup truck continued to run interference, weaving between lanes to block the SUVs from regaining their position. Bartholomew could hear his heart pounding over the engine noise as he pushed the truck harder, watching the speedometer climb past 80. The trailer started to sway slightly at that speed, 40,000 pounds of cargo wanting to obey the laws of physics, but he kept his foot down. A muzzle flash lit up the darkness behind him. The sharp crack of gunfire was swallowed by the roar of engines, but Bartholomew saw it clearly in his mirror. Someone in one of the Suburbans had fired at the pickup truck. The Ram swerved violently, and for a terrifying moment, Bartholomew thought it was going to roll. But the driver managed to maintain control, though the truck was now falling back, clearly damaged or the driver reconsidering their involvement. More muzzle flashes. The pickup's rear window exploded, and the truck veered off onto the shoulder, slowing rapidly before disappearing into the darkness behind them. Bartholomew was alone again with the two Suburbans, which were now accelerating hard to catch up with him. His mind raced through options. The truck was governed at 90 miles per hour. He couldn't outrun them even if he wanted to risk jackknifing the trailer at that speed. There were no exits for another 15 miles. No side roads that could handle a big rig. Fighting wasn't an option. He had nothing but a tire iron and a folding knife in the cab. The lead Suburban pulled alongside him again, this time on the right side. Through his passenger window, Bartholomew saw the SUV's rear window roll down. The barrel of a rifle emerged, pointing directly at his cab. They weren't trying to force him to stop anymore. They were going to kill him and take the truck. Bartholomew made a decision that went against every instinct he'd developed in 20 years of driving. He yanked the steering wheel hard to the right, sending 78,000 pounds of truck and trailer directly into the Suburban's path. The SUV driver had maybe half a second to react before the Peterbilt's front bumper connected with the vehicle's left side. The impact was tremendous. The Suburban spun away like a toy, rolling twice before coming to rest upside down in the roadside ditch. Bartholomew fought to control the truck as it shuddered from the collision, the trailer threatening to jackknife. He could smell burning rubber as the tires screamed against the asphalt, but years of experience kept him from overcorrecting. The second Suburban was still behind him, and now its occupants were shooting. Bartholomew heard bullets impact the trailer, metallic pings that sounded like deadly hail. His side mirror exploded in a shower of glass and plastic. Another round punched through the sleeper compartment behind him. Up ahead, Bartholomew saw salvation, a distant glow of lights that had to be the truck stop at Cimarron. It was still miles away, but it was civilization. Witnesses. Help. He kept the accelerator pressed to the floor, weaving slightly to make himself a harder target. The Suburban suddenly accelerated, pulling into the left lane to come alongside him. Bartholomew tensed, ready to ram them again if necessary, but instead of attacking, the SUV's driver seemed to be looking ahead at the approaching lights of the truck stop. After a moment that felt like an eternity, the vehicle's brake lights flared, and it fell back rapidly, making a hard U-turn across the median and heading back east into the darkness. Bartholomew didn't slow down until he was pulling into the brightly lit truck stop, his hands shaking so badly he could barely manage the downshift. He parked directly in front of the main building, under the security cameras and floodlights, and sat there for a full minute, trying to process what had just happened. When he finally climbed down from the cab, his legs nearly gave out. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving him feeling hollow and exhausted. He walked around the truck, surveying the damage. The front bumper was crumpled and smeared with black paint from the Suburban. There were at least a dozen bullet holes in the trailer's side. The passenger mirror was gone, and there was a neat hole in the sleeper compartment that, if he'd been resting back there, would have gone right through his head. Inside the truck stop, Bartholomew found a payphone and called 911. His voice was steady as he reported the attempted hijacking, giving the dispatcher the mile markers and descriptions of the vehicles. Then he called his company's emergency line, knowing this was going to mean hours of questions, paperwork, and probably the end of his employment if they decided he'd acted recklessly. While he waited for the state troopers to arrive, Bartholomew bought a cup of coffee and sat at a booth near the window, watching his damaged truck. A couple of other drivers asked if he was okay, noticing his pale complexion and the way his hands still trembled slightly. He just nodded, not ready to talk about it yet. When the police finally arrived, 2 state troopers in separate cruisers, they took his statement with professional detachment. One of them, a sergeant named Rodriguez, mentioned that there had been 3 similar attempts in the past month, all targeting trucks carrying electronics or pharmaceuticals. The methods were getting more aggressive, more violent. "You're lucky," Rodriguez said, examining the bullet holes in the trailer. The last driver who encountered these guys ended up in intensive care. They ran him completely off the road near the Colorado border. Bartholomew thought about the pickup truck that had intervened, wondering if the driver was okay. He gave Rodriguez the details, and the sergeant promised they'd send units to search for the vehicle. But they both knew that whoever had been driving that Ram was probably either dead or had reasons of their own for not wanting to be found. The investigation took 3 hours. The troopers photographed everything, took samples of paint transfer from the collision, and tried to recover bullet fragments from the trailer. They found the overturned Suburban about 8 miles back, abandoned and stripped of any identifying information. No plates, no registration, no personal items. Professional criminals who knew how to disappear. As dawn broke over the Kansas plains, Bartholomew was finally cleared to continue his delivery. The company had sent another driver to take over, insurance liability and all that, but Bartholomew insisted on riding along. He needed to see this through, needed to prove to himself that he could still do this job. The replacement driver, a young guy named Tommy, kept glancing at Bartholomew during the remaining drive to Denver, clearly in awe of the older man's survival story. But Bartholomew just stared out at the passing landscape, thinking about how close he'd come to becoming another statistic on a lonely highway. Later, much later, after the insurance claims and the internal investigations and the endless retelling of that night's events, Bartholomew learned something that chilled him more than the gunfire had. The electronics in his trailer weren't just consumer goods. Hidden among the legitimate cargo were several crates of military-grade communication equipment that had been reported stolen from a National Guard armory in Missouri. His company claimed they had no knowledge of the stolen goods, that someone must have infiltrated their supply chain. The FBI got involved, tracking the shipment back through a complex web of shell companies and false documentation. But they never found the people behind it all, the ones who had sent those Suburbans after Bartholomew that night. The pickup truck driver was never found either. The vehicle turned up 2 days later, abandoned at a rest stop 50 miles away. The interior was covered in blood, but no body was ever recovered. Rodriguez called Bartholomew to tell him they'd found something interesting in the truck: a police scanner tuned to the state patrol frequencies and a notebook with detailed information about trucking routes through western Kansas. The driver had been monitoring the situation, had known Bartholomew was in trouble even before the Suburbans had made their move. Guardian angel or fellow criminal, Rodriguez had said. Either way, he saved your life. Bartholomew thought about that often in the weeks that followed. About the split-second decisions that meant the difference between living and dying on those dark highways. About the pickup driver who had risked everything to help a stranger. About the fact that somewhere out there, the people who had orchestrated the hijacking attempt were probably planning their next move. He went back to driving after a month off, but things were different now. The company assigned him different routes, always daylight runs, always on major interstates with plenty of traffic. They'd offered him a desk job, but Bartholomew knew he'd go crazy sitting still. The road was in his blood, even if it had nearly killed him. On quiet nights, when he was home in his apartment in Wichita, Bartholomew would sometimes wake up thinking he heard gunfire. He'd lie there in the darkness, listening to the distant sound of trucks on the highway, and remember the weight of the steering wheel in his hands as he'd made the choice to ram that Suburban. The choice to fight instead of submit. The investigation never went anywhere conclusive. The FBI traced the stolen military equipment to a black market operation with international connections, but the trail went cold somewhere in Eastern Europe. The hijacking crew was never caught, though similar attempts stopped happening in that region, suggesting they'd either been scared off or had moved their operations elsewhere. Bartholomew kept driving for another 3 years before finally retiring. He never forgot that night on Highway 50, never stopped checking his mirrors for vehicles that followed too closely, never stopped wondering about the identity of the pickup truck driver who had appeared at exactly the right moment. Sometimes, late at night at truck stops, other drivers would recognize him. Word had spread through the trucking community about the driver who'd fought off hijackers, who'd survived a running gunfight on the Kansas plains. They'd buy him coffee, ask him to tell the story, treat him like some kind of folk hero. But Bartholomew always downplayed it, always reminded them that he'd just been lucky. The truth was more complicated than luck, though. It was about split-second decisions, about trusting your instincts, about being willing to fight when running wasn't an option. It was about the strange brotherhood of the road, where even criminals sometimes looked out for each other against a greater threat. On his last run before retirement, Bartholomew deliberately took Highway 50 through western Kansas one final time. He drove it during the day, with full cell phone coverage and a GPS tracker, but he needed to face that stretch of road one more time. As he passed the spot where it had happened, now just an unremarkable piece of highway with no sign of the violence that had occurred there, he thought he saw a black Suburban in his mirrors. His heart rate spiked, his hands tightened on the wheel, and for a moment he was back in that night, fighting for his life. But then the Suburban passed him normally, a family visible through the windows, kids watching movies on tablets in the back seat. Just another vehicle on just another highway. Bartholomew laughed at himself, at the way trauma could make shadows out of nothing. But he also understood that those shadows had kept him alive, had made him cautious in a profession where complacency could be fatal. As he continued west toward the setting sun, he said a silent prayer for the unknown pickup driver who had saved his life, and for all the drivers still out there on the lonely highways, hoping they'd never have to face what he'd faced that October night. The cargo he'd been hauling that night was never fully accounted for. Some of the military equipment was recovered when the FBI raided a warehouse in New Jersey 6 months later, but most of it had vanished into the black market. Bartholomew sometimes wondered what those communication devices were being used for, what operations they were enabling somewhere in the world. But that wasn't his problem anymore. What stayed with him, what he carried forward into his retirement, was the knowledge that evil could find you anywhere, even on a quiet highway in the middle of nowhere. But also that sometimes, inexplicably, help could appear just when you needed it most. That pickup driver, whoever he was, had made a choice to intervene, knowing the risks, knowing he might die for it. That kind of courage, that kind of sacrifice, was worth remembering. In his retirement, Bartholomew bought a small house outside Wichita, far from any major highways. He grew tomatoes in the backyard and learned to cook, finding peace in simple routines that didn't involve 18 wheels and endless miles of asphalt. But on quiet evenings, when the sun set over the Kansas plains and the sky turned that particular shade of purple that only happens in the Midwest, he'd think about the road. He'd remember the good times, the sunrises over the Rockies, the camaraderie at truck stops, the satisfaction of delivering a load on time. But he'd also remember that night, the muzzle flashes in his mirrors, the impact of the Suburban spinning away into the darkness, the choice to fight when flight wasn't an option. That night had changed him, had stripped away any illusions about the safety of the open road. But it had also shown him something about himself, about his capacity to survive, to make the hard choices when they mattered most. And, in a strange way, he was grateful for that knowledge, even if gaining it had nearly cost him everything. The trucking company eventually settled out of court regarding the stolen military equipment, paying substantial fines but avoiding criminal charges. They implemented new security measures, background checks for all supply chain partners, GPS tracking on all shipments. But Bartholomew knew that determined criminals would always find ways around such measures. The road would always have its dangers. Sometimes, young drivers would seek him out, wanting advice about staying safe on long hauls. Bartholomew would tell them the practical things: trust your instincts, maintain situational awareness, never let your guard down completely. But he'd also tell them about the importance of looking out for each other, about the unwritten code of the road that said you helped a fellow driver in trouble, even if it meant putting yourself at risk. That pickup driver, he'd say, whoever he was, he didn't have to get involved. Could have just called it in to the police and kept driving, but he chose to act, chose to put himself between me and those hijackers. That's what separates us from them. We look out for each other out there. The young drivers would nod, thinking they understood, but Bartholomew knew they couldn't really grasp it until they'd been tested themselves, until they'd faced that moment when they had to decide whether to be a victim or a fighter, whether to help or hide. 3 weeks before his retirement, Bartholomew had agreed to train a rookie driver named Samuel. The kid was 23, fresh out of trucking school, all eager energy and textbook knowledge with no real understanding of what the road could throw at you. They were running a simple route from Wichita to Oklahoma City, hauling agricultural equipment, nothing that should attract the wrong kind of attention. Samuel had heard the stories about Bartholomew, of course. Every driver in the company knew about the Highway 50 incident. The kid kept stealing glances at the older man, probably trying to reconcile the quiet, methodical driver beside him with the legend who'd fought off armed hijackers. Bartholomew didn't encourage the hero worship. If anything, he tried to temper it with reality. "The thing you need to understand," Bartholomew told him as they rolled through the darkness south of Wichita, "is that most of the time the job is boring, monotonous. The danger comes when you let that monotony make you complacent." They were on Highway 35, a decent stretch of road with moderate traffic even at night. Samuel was driving, Bartholomew observing from the passenger seat, occasionally offering corrections to the younger man's technique. The kid was actually pretty good. Smooth with the gear changes, maintained proper following distance, checked his mirrors regularly. But there was a tension in his shoulders, a white knuckle grip on the wheel that showed his nervousness. "Relax," Bartholomew said. "You're doing fine. The truck isn't going to suddenly turn into a wild animal. Trust the machine. Trust your training." Samuel nodded, loosening his grip slightly. "It's just, being out here at night, knowing what happened to you, it makes me think every car might be..." "Might be what? Full of hijackers?" Bartholomew shook his head. "You can't think that way. You'll drive yourself crazy. Stay alert, yes. Trust your instincts, absolutely. But don't see enemies where there aren't any." The irony of those words would hit Bartholomew later, when he replayed the events that followed. Because even as he was telling Samuel not to be paranoid, his own instincts were starting to ping. There was a van that had been behind them for the last 30 miles, maintaining a steady distance. Not suspicious in itself, but something about its position, the way it moved, reminded him uncomfortably of that night 3 years ago. He didn't mention it to Samuel. No point in making the kid more nervous than he already was. Instead, Bartholomew casually adjusted his mirror to get a better look at the vehicle. A white panel van, the kind contractors or delivery services used. No visible markings, windows too dark to see inside. Could be completely innocent. Probably was. But then he noticed something that made his stomach tighten. The van's headlights had that same quality he remembered from the Suburbans. High-end, probably aftermarket, giving off a distinctive blue-white light that was almost too bright for legal standards. The kind of modification someone made when they expected to do a lot of nighttime driving. Or nighttime hunting. "Samuel," he said, keeping his voice casual, "take the next exit. I want to show you something about managing fuel consumption." The kid glanced at the fuel gauge, which showed 3/4 full. "But we just filled up an hour ago. Trust me, this is important." Samuel put on his turn signal, and Bartholomew watched the van in his mirror. It continued straight, not following them off the exit. He felt his shoulders relax slightly. Maybe he was being paranoid after all. 3 years of looking over his shoulder had made him see threats everywhere. They pulled into a small truck stop, mostly empty at this hour. A couple of other rigs were parked in the back, drivers probably catching some sleep. Bartholomew had Samuel park near the building, under the lights. "What are we really doing here?" Samuel asked, once they'd stopped. Bartholomew considered lying, maintaining the fuel consumption excuse. But the kid deserved to know what to look for. "There was a van following us. Probably nothing, but I wanted to check. This is part of the job, too, knowing when to trust your gut." Samuel's eyes widened. "Should we call someone? The police? And tell them what? A van was driving on the same highway as us?" Bartholomew shook his head. "No, we wait a few minutes, then get back on the road. If we see it again, then we worry." They sat in the cab for 15 minutes, Bartholomew using the time to quiz Samuel on pre-trip inspection procedures. Normal training stuff, but his eyes kept drifting to the parking lot entrance, watching for that white van. It never appeared. When they got back on the highway, Bartholomew took over driving. He told Samuel it was part of the training, showing him how to handle the rig in different conditions, but really he wanted to be in control if something happened. The kid didn't argue, seeming relieved to be in the passenger seat. For the next hour, everything was normal. Traffic was light, the weather was clear, and there was no sign of the white van. Bartholomew started to relax, thinking maybe he'd overreacted. But then, just as they were passing through a particularly desolate stretch near the Oklahoma border, he saw them again. Not just the van this time. 2 vehicles coming up fast from behind. The van and a dark pickup truck moving in coordination. The same kind of formation he'd seen 3 years ago. "Samuel," he said quietly, "I need you to stay calm. We might have a problem." The kid turned to look back, and Bartholomew saw his face go pale in the dashboard lights. Is this? Maybe, maybe not. But I need you to do exactly what I tell you." Bartholomew reached for the CB radio, switching to channel 19. "Breaker 19, this is Big Bar southbound on 35, mile marker 78. Looking for a radio check, come back." A voice crackled back immediately. "Hey there, Big Bar. This is Temperance, running about 5 miles behind you. Everything okay up there?" Bartholomew frowned. The voice was female, which wasn't unusual. Plenty of women drove trucks. But something about the timing, the fact that someone was exactly where they'd need to be to help, felt off. Still, he couldn't afford to be choosy about potential allies. "Temperance. I've got 2 vehicles running up on me fast, looking like they might be planning something unfriendly. White panel van and a dark pickup. You might want to hang back." "Negative, Big Bar. I'm heading your way. Nobody messes with fellow drivers on my watch. Give me 3 minutes." The van and pickup were closing fast now, maybe 100 yards back. Bartholomew could see them clearly in his mirrors, running without any attempt at subtlety. The pickup moved into the left lane, accelerating to come alongside. "Samuel, there's a pistol in the glove box," Bartholomew said. "It's loaded. Safety's on. I want you to have it ready, but don't show it unless I tell you to." The kid's hands shook as he retrieved the weapon, a Glock 19 that Bartholomew had started carrying after the first incident. Having it in the cab was technically legal with his concealed carry permit, but company policy forbade it. Right now, Bartholomew didn't care about company policy. The pickup pulled even with the cab, and Bartholomew could see the passenger window rolling down. A man leaned out, pointing something at them. Not a gun. It looked like some kind of electronic device. "He's got a jammer," Bartholomew realized, just as a CB radio died, filling the cab with static. The bastards were using the same tactics as before, cutting off communications before making their move. The van accelerated past them on the right, using the shoulder to get around the trailer. Bartholomew watched it pull back into the lane about 50 yards ahead and start to slow down. They were going to box him in, force him to stop. But this time, Bartholomew was ready for it. "Hold on," he told Samuel, then reached for the engine brake. The Jake brake engaged with its characteristic rattling roar, and the big rig immediately started slowing. The pickup, caught off guard, shot past them. The van ahead continued slowing, but now there was space. Options. Bartholomew saw an emergency vehicle turn around in the median, the kind used by state troopers to reverse direction. Without hesitation, he yanked the wheel left, sending the truck into a controlled skid across both lanes toward the median. Samuel let out a strangled cry as the truck tilted, threatening to tip. The trailer swung wide, and for a moment Bartholomew thought he'd miscalculated, that they were going over. But the weight distribution held, and they bounced through the median in a cloud of dust and flying grass. They emerged on the northbound side of the highway facing the wrong direction, but moving away from their attackers. Bartholomew could see the van and pickup in his mirrors, brake lights flaring as they tried to figure out what had just happened. "Holy shit," Samuel breathed. "Holy shit, we just..." "We're not clear yet," Bartholomew said, scanning the road ahead. Northbound traffic was light, but driving a semi the wrong way on a highway was insanely dangerous. He needed to get turned around fast. That's when he saw another set of headlights coming toward them from the north, moving fast, flashing their high beams. For a moment, Bartholomew thought it was just a car warning them about driving the wrong way. Then he realized the lights were too high, too wide apart. It was another truck, a Kenworth from the look of it, and it was slowing down, pulling to the shoulder to give them room to pass. As they drew closer, Bartholomew could see the driver, a woman with short-cropped gray hair, probably in her 50s. She had her window down, and as they passed she gave them a thumbs up. The name on the truck's door was Temperance Trucking, LLC. "That's her," Samuel said. "The one from the radio." Bartholomew watched in his mirrors as Temperance's truck pulled back onto the highway, positioning itself between them and the pursuing vehicles. The van and pickup had made it through the median and were coming north, but now they had 40 tons of Kenworth in their way. There was another emergency turnaround about a mile ahead. Bartholomew took it, getting them back on the southbound side, now heading in the right direction again. Behind them, he could see Temperance's truck weaving across both lanes, blocking any attempt by the van and pickup to pass. The CB radio suddenly crackled back to life. "Big Bar, this is Temperance. These boys just gave up and took an exit. You're clear. Want to tell me what that was all about?" Bartholomew grabbed the mic, relief flooding through him. "Temperance, I owe you a drink and a steak dinner. Where did you come from?" "Been tracking these assholes for 2 weeks," she replied. "They've been hitting trucks all along this corridor. I had a feeling they'd go after you. Heard through the grapevine that you were running this route with a trainee. Figured that made you a target. How did you know about the trainee?" There was a pause. "Let's just say I keep my ears open. Pull off at exit 15. There's a Flying J there. State police are already on their way." Bartholomew glanced at Samuel, who was still clutching the pistol with white knuckles. "Put that away," he said gently. "We're okay now." The kid fumbled the gun back into the glove box, then suddenly turned and vomited into a plastic bag he grabbed from the floor, the adrenaline crash hitting him hard. Bartholomew remembered that feeling from his first incident, the way your body rebels once the danger passes. They made it to the Flying J without further incident. 3 state trooper vehicles were already there, lights flashing. Temperance's Kenworth pulled in right behind them. When she climbed down from her cab, Bartholomew got his first good look at the woman who'd saved them. She was weathered in the way longtime truckers got, with deep lines around her eyes from squinting into the sun. But there was something else there, too, a hardness that suggested she'd seen more than just highways in her life. Maybe military, maybe law enforcement, maybe something else entirely. "Bartholomew," she said, extending a hand. "Heard a lot about you." "Temperance, I'd say the same, but I've never heard of you before tonight." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That's kind of the point. I run solo, stay off the radar, but when I heard those bastards were targeting drivers again, and that you were going to be on the road, well, couldn't let history repeat itself. Again. You mean this is the same crew from 3 years ago? Not the same people, but the same operation. They got smart after you fought them off. Started using different vehicles, different tactics. But the pattern's the same. Target trucks carrying specific cargo, use teams to box them in, jam communications." She paused. "Your trainee okay?" Bartholomew glanced back at the truck where Samuel was sitting on the running board, head in his hands. "He will be. Hell of a first week on the job, though." The state troopers took their statements, but Bartholomew could tell they weren't optimistic about catching the perpetrators. The vehicles were probably already dumped, the crew scattered. Without license plates or clear descriptions of the individuals, there wasn't much to go on. "This is bigger than just highway robbery," Temperance said quietly while the troopers were interviewing Samuel. "These people know exactly which trucks to target, what they're carrying. They have inside information." "From where?" "Shipping companies, distribution centers, maybe even the trucking companies themselves. Someone's feeding them data." She pulled out a cigarette, lit it despite the no smoking signs. "I've been tracking it for months. There's a pattern, but proving it is another matter." "Why do you care?" "No offense, but most drivers would just avoid the dangerous routes and move on." Temperance took a long drag, exhaled slowly. "Let's just say I have a vested interest in keeping these roads safe, and maybe a bit of a grudge against people who prey on truckers." She wouldn't elaborate beyond that, but Bartholomew got the sense there was a story there, probably a painful one. He didn't push. In the trucking world, everyone had their secrets, their reasons for choosing a life on the road. Samuel rejoined them, looking pale but steadier. "The troopers said we can go. They'll contact us if they need anything else." Bartholomew looked at the kid, saw the fear still lingering in his eyes. "You want to call it quits? No one would blame you. This isn't what you signed up for." Samuel was quiet for a moment, then shook his head. "No, I mean, I'm scared as hell, but you didn't quit after what happened to you. And Temperance here risked her neck to help us. Seems wrong to give up now." Temperance smiled, and this time it was genuine. "Kid's got spine. He'll make a good driver." They convoyed the rest of the way to Oklahoma City, Temperance taking the lead, Bartholomew and Samuel following. The delivery went smoothly, no sign of any trouble. But Bartholomew noticed Temperance watching everything, cataloging faces, vehicles, anything that might be useful later. As they were preparing to leave, she pulled Bartholomew aside. "They're not going to stop. These people, whoever's running this operation, they've got too much invested to give up because of a couple of failed attempts. You need to be careful. What about you? I'll keep doing what I do, watching, tracking, occasionally intervening when necessary." She handed him a business card with just a phone number, no name, no company. "If you ever see something, or if you need backup, call this number, day or night." Bartholomew pocketed the card. "Who are you really, Temperance?" She climbed back into her truck, started the engine. "Just a driver who got tired of seeing good people get hurt. Take care of yourself, Bartholomew, and keep that kid safe. The road needs more drivers like him, ones who don't give up when things get scary." She pulled out, leaving Bartholomew and Samuel standing in the lot. The kid looked at the older man, questions clear in his eyes. "Don't ask," Bartholomew said. "Sometimes on the road, you meet angels. Sometimes you meet devils. And sometimes you meet people who are a little of both. The trick is knowing which one's there to help you." The drive back to Wichita was uneventful, but Bartholomew noticed Samuel watching the mirrors more carefully, paying attention to vehicles that lingered too long behind them. The kid was learning, adapting. The innocence was gone, replaced by the kind of vigilance that might keep him alive. 2 days later, Bartholomew saw a news report about a massive federal raid on a shipping company in Kansas City. 23 arrests, charges ranging from interstate commerce fraud to conspiracy to commit armed robbery. The investigation had apparently been ongoing for years, but someone had provided crucial intelligence that broke the case open. The report didn't mention Temperance, but Bartholomew knew. Somehow, she'd been involved. The timing was too convenient, the target too specific. She'd said she had a vested interest in keeping the roads safe. Now he wondered if she was some kind of undercover agent, or maybe just a vigilante trucker with her own agenda. He never saw her again after that night. The phone number she'd given him went to voicemail whenever he tried it. Just a generic message with no name. But sometimes, late at night on empty highways, he'd hear her voice on the CB radio. Just a quick check-in, making sure drivers were safe, warning about speed traps or weather conditions. Samuel finished his training and went on to become a solid driver. He never forgot that night, the terror of being hunted, but also the relief of having backup arrive just when needed. He carried forward the lesson Bartholomew had taught him, that the trucking community looked out for its own, even if sometimes that help came from unexpected sources. The hijacking attempts along that corridor stopped after the federal raid. The masterminds behind the operation were prosecuted, though the full extent of the conspiracy never became public. Bartholomew suspected there were connections that went higher up, people who couldn't be touched, but at least the immediate threat was neutralized. In his final weeks before retirement, Bartholomew thought often about both incidents, the violent encounter 3 years prior and this second, stranger event. The first had taught him that the road could be dangerous, that predators lurked in the darkness between cities. The second had shown him that there were also protectors out there, guardian angels in 18-wheelers who emerged when needed most. The call came at 3 a.m, 2 weeks before Bartholomew's official retirement date. His phone buzzing on the nightstand. The number unfamiliar, but somehow he knew who it would be before he answered. "Bartholomew." Temperance's voice was strained, urgent. "I need you to listen carefully. They know who you are, Zebulon's people. They're coming." He sat up in bed, instantly alert. Zebulon? Who the hell is Zebulon? The man who's been running these hijacking operations. The raids only got his street-level people. He's still out there, and he blames you for his losses. There was a pause, sounds of movement on her end. "You testified in the federal case. Your name is in the court documents. He found your address." Bartholomew was already out of bed, pulling on jeans and a shirt. "How do you know this?" "No time to explain. You need to leave. Now. Don't take your car. They know it. There's a truck stop on Highway 54 about 2 miles from your house. Pete's Fuel and Food. Get there on foot if you can. I'll have someone pick you up." "Temperance, what's really going on? Who are you?" "Someone who made a promise to keep you safe." "Move, Bartholomew. You've got maybe 10 minutes. The line went dead. Bartholomew stood in his bedroom for exactly 3 seconds, weighing his options. He could dismiss this as paranoia, go back to bed, trust in the normalcy of his suburban life. Or he could trust the woman who'd already saved his life once. He grabbed his concealed carry pistol, his wallet, phone, and a jacket. Nothing else. If Temperance was wrong, he'd feel foolish but be safe. If she was right, anything else would slow him down. He went out the back door, through his yard into the alley behind his house. The neighborhood was silent, streetlights casting long shadows. He moved quickly but carefully, avoiding the main roads, cutting through yards and side streets he'd memorized from years of evening walks. He was 3 blocks from his house when he saw the vehicles. 2 black SUVs rolling slowly down his street, lights off, predatory in their silence. They stopped in front of his house, and he watched 4 men exit, moving with military precision toward his front door. Bartholomew's blood ran cold. Temperance had been right. If he'd been asleep, if she hadn't called. He turned and ran, no longer caring about stealth. Behind him, he heard the crash of his front door being kicked in, shouts of anger when they found the house empty. He had minutes, maybe less, before they figured out he'd fled on foot. The truck stop appeared ahead, its neon lights a beacon in the darkness. A handful of trucks were parked in the lot, drivers sleeping or just passing through. Bartholomew scanned the vehicles, looking for something. Someone, though he didn't know what Temperance had arranged. A horn honked twice, short bursts. A Freightliner Cascadia, engine running, passenger door swinging open. Bartholomew didn't hesitate, jogging over and climbing up into the cab. The driver was a young black woman, maybe 25, with intricate braided hair and alert eyes. "You're Bartholomew. Temperance sent me. Name's Keisha." "Who?" "Questions later. Right now, we need to move." She dropped the truck into gear, pulling out of the lot with practiced ease. "There's a safe house about 3 hours from here. Temperance will meet us there." As they merged onto the highway, Bartholomew looked back and saw headlights racing towards the truck stop. The SUVs searching for him, but they were too late. The truck was already accelerating into the darkness, becoming just another set of lights on the interstate. "You're one of Temperance's people?" Bartholomew asked, once they'd put some miles between them and Wichita. Keisha nodded. "She helped me out of a bad situation couple years back. Abusive ex who also happened to be trafficking drugs in trucking routes. Temperance didn't just get me away from him, she made sure he went to prison. Now I help her when she needs it." "Help her do what, exactly?" "Keep drivers safe. Track down the people who prey on truckers. Sometimes that means surveillance, sometimes it means extraction, like tonight." She glanced at him. "She says you're important, that keeping you alive matters." "Why? I'm just a driver about to retire." "No, you're the driver who stood up to them, twice. Your testimony put a dozen people in federal prison. You became a symbol, whether you wanted to or not." Keisha checked her mirrors, a habit Bartholomew recognized. Zebulon can't let that stand. It's not just about revenge. It's about sending a message to other drivers. Cooperate with the feds, and this is what happens. They drove through the night, taking seemingly random exits, doubling back twice, making sure they weren't followed. Keisha knew her craft, handling the big rig with a confidence that spoke of years on the road despite her youth. The safe house turned out to be an abandoned truck depot near the Oklahoma border, far from any town. Several trucks were already parked there. Drivers Bartholomew didn't recognize standing guard. They nodded as Keisha pulled in, clearly part of whatever network Temperance had built. Temperance was waiting inside what used to be the dispatch office, maps spread across a table, multiple phones charging on a desk. She looked tired, older than when he'd last seen her, but her eyes were sharp as ever. "Bartholomew, good, you made it." She gestured to a chair. "We need to talk about Zebulon. Starting with who the hell he is." Temperance pulled out a folder, spread photographs on the table. The man in the pictures was unremarkable. Medium height, brown hair going gray. The kind of face you'd forget 5 minutes after seeing it. But his eyes were different. Flat, calculating, devoid of warmth. Zebulon Marsh, former logistics officer for a private military company, got into the criminal side after his discharge. He built the hijacking network using military tactics, treating highways like supply lines to be disrupted. She pointed to another photo, this one showing Zebulon with several other men. He lost over $3 million when the feds raided his operation. Lost his brother, too. Got 25 years. And now he wants me dead. He wants you to suffer first, then dead. Temperance pulled out another document. "We intercepted communications suggesting he was planning to take you to one of his warehouses, make an example of you. Record it, spread it through the trucker network as a warning." Bartholomew felt sick. "How do you have all this information?" Temperance was quiet for a moment. Then she rolled up her sleeve, revealing a tattoo on her forearm. FBI, badge number. Date that suggested she'd been with them for at least 15 years. "Retired FBI?" Bartholomew asked. Officially, yes. Unofficially. Let's say I found retirement boring. She rolled her sleeve back down. I spent 10 years tracking interstate crime rings. Saw how they targeted truckers, how the system failed to protect drivers. So I decided to do something about it. You're running your own operation. A network of drivers, former law enforcement, people who've been victims of these crimes. We share information, provide protection when needed, occasionally feed intel to the authorities when we can do it without exposing ourselves. She gestured to the people visible through the window. Every person here has a story, a reason to fight back. And now I'm part of this? Only if you want to be. But right now, you need our protection. Zebulon has resources, connections. Your house is burned, you can't go back. He'll have people watching your family, your friends, anywhere you might run. Bartholomew thought about the small life he'd built in Wichita. The garden he'd been planning, the quiet retirement he'd earned. All gone now because he'd had the audacity to survive and testify. "What's the plan?" he asked. Temperance smiled grimly. "We're going to end this, but we need to draw him out, make him think he's winning." Over the next 2 hours, she laid out the strategy. Bartholomew would appear to flee, heading west on a predetermined route. They'd leak the information through channels they knew Zebulon monitored. He'd think Bartholomew was running scared, alone, vulnerable. "But you won't be alone," Temperance assured him. "We'll have trucks shadowing you the whole way, ready to intervene. When Zebulon makes his move, we'll be ready. Using me as bait. Using you as bait to catch a predator who won't stop until he's put down." Temperance's expression softened slightly. "I won't lie to you, Bartholomew. It's dangerous. But doing nothing, trying to hide, that's just delaying the inevitable. This way, we control the when and where." Bartholomew looked around the room at the assembled drivers. Men and women who'd chosen to fight back rather than live in fear. He thought about Samuel, about all the young drivers just starting out who deserved to work without looking over their shoulders. "When do we start?" The plan went into motion the next morning. Bartholomew took possession of a truck registered under a fake name, loaded with empty boxes that looked like valuable cargo. He started driving west on Highway 50, the same route where everything had started 3 years ago. The first day was uneventful. He stopped at predetermined locations, made himself visible, played the part of a scared man trying to disappear. Temperance's people checked in regularly via burner phones, confirming they were in position. On the second day, he saw them. 3 vehicles maintaining careful distance, rotating positions to avoid detection. But Bartholomew knew the signs now, recognized the patterns. Zebulon had taken the bait. He continued driving, fighting every instinct that told him to run, to deviate from the plan. As the sun set over the Kansas plains, painting the sky blood red, he approached the designated spot, a way station that had been closed for repairs, isolated but with good sightlines. That's when they made their move. The vehicles accelerated simultaneously, no longer hiding their intent. 2 SUVs and a pickup truck, windows down, weapons visible. They came at him from 3 sides, a perfect assault formation that would have trapped any normal driver. But Bartholomew wasn't alone, and this wasn't a normal situation. 3 18-wheelers suddenly emerged from where they'd been hidden behind the way station buildings. They moved with coordinated precision, slamming into the attacking vehicles with calculated force. The pickup truck went airborne, rolling twice before landing upside down. 1 SUV was crushed between 2 trucks, metal screaming and glass exploding. The 3rd SUV, the one Bartholomew could see Zebulon in, tried to flee. But Temperance's Kenworth came roaring out of nowhere, T-boning it at full speed. The impact was catastrophic. sending the SUV spinning into the drainage ditch. In seconds, it was over. Bartholomew sat in his cab, hands shaking, watching as Temperance's people secured the scene. Some were zip-tying survivors, others were already on phones calling it in to law enforcement contacts. Temperance approached his truck, climbing up to the passenger side. "You okay?" "Is he dead?" "Zebulon, no. Broken ribs, concussion, but he'll live to stand trial." She smiled coldly. Death would have been too easy. Now he gets to experience the system from the other side. And with the evidence we've gathered, he'll never see freedom again. The cleanup took hours. Official law enforcement arrived, taking custody of Zebulon and his surviving crew members. The FBI agent in charge seemed unsurprised to find Temperance there, suggesting her unofficial status had some official approval. As dawn broke over the plains, Bartholomew stood beside his truck, watching the last of the emergency vehicles leave. Temperance stood beside him, both of them silent for a long moment. "It's over," she finally said. "Your part in this anyway. Zebulon's network is finished. You can have your life back." "Can I? My house is compromised. Everyone knows my name now. We can help with that. New identity if you want it, or just relocation assistance. You've earned that much." Bartholomew thought about it, then shook his head. "No, I'm done running, done hiding. If other drivers know my name, know what happened, maybe that's not a bad thing." "What are you thinking?" "You've got this network. Drivers helping drivers, fighting back against the predators. Maybe you could use someone with experience, someone who's been through it and survived." Temperance raised an eyebrow. "You want to join us? I thought you were retiring. From driving, maybe. But this is different. This is about keeping people safe, making sure what happened to me doesn't happen to others." He looked at her. "Unless you don't want an old trucker slowing you down." She laughed, the first genuine laugh he'd heard from her. "Bartholomew, you just helped us take down one of the most dangerous hijacking rings in the country. I'd say you've proven your worth." They shook hands, a deal sealed on a lonely Kansas highway, as the sun painted the world gold. Bartholomew's retirement would look different than he'd planned, but perhaps more meaningful. Instead of tending a garden, he'd be helping tend to the safety of the roads he'd traveled for so long. Over the following weeks, he was integrated into Temperance's network. He learned the communication protocols, the emergency procedures, the ways they tracked potential threats. He met other members, all with their own stories of survival or loss that had brought them to this work. Samuel called him a month later, having heard through the trucker grapevine about what had happened. The kid was doing well, running his own routes now, confident but careful. "I heard you're some kind of guardian angel now," Samuel said, watching over other drivers. "Something like that," Bartholomew replied. "Just trying to pay forward the help I received." "Well, if you ever need anything, you call me. I owe you that much." After the call, Bartholomew sat in the small apartment Temperance's network had arranged for him, looking at the map on his wall. Red pins marked recent suspicious incidents, potential threats to investigate. Blue pins showed where network members were positioned, ready to respond. His phone buzzed with a text from Temperance. "Got a report of suspicious activity on I-70 near Salina. 3 trucks have reported being followed by the same vehicles. You want to take lead on this?" Bartholomew typed back, "On my way." He grabbed his keys, not to a truck this time, but to an unmarked car equipped with surveillance equipment. His role had evolved from driver to protector, from victim to guardian. As he drove toward Salina, Bartholomew thought about the strange path that had brought him here. 3 years ago, he'd just been trying to deliver a load of stolen military equipment he didn't even know was stolen. Now he was part of something larger, something necessary. The highway stretched ahead, familiar yet different now that he saw it from this new perspective. Every truck he passed could be carrying someone in danger. Every rest stop could be a hunting ground. But also, every driver could be part of the network, watching, ready to help. 6 months into his new role with Temperance's network, Bartholomew had developed a reputation among both the protectors and the predators. The old trucker who'd survived 2 hijacking attempts had become something of a ghost story himself, the one who watched from the shadows, who appeared when drivers were in trouble. It was a humid September night when everything came full circle. Bartholomew was monitoring communications from a small office they'd set up in an abandoned truck stop near the Kansas-Nebraska border. The space wasn't much. A couple of desks, computers, radio equipment, maps covering the walls, but it served as a nerve center for their section of the network. The call came in just after midnight. A young driver couldn't have been on the road more than a year, voice tight with fear. "This is Kentucky Rose, eastbound on 50 near Kinsley. I've got 2 vehicles following me, matching my speed changes. Been with me for the last 30 miles. Something doesn't feel right." Bartholomew grabbed the radio mic. "Kentucky Rose, this is Guardian Base. Can you describe the vehicles?" 2 pickups, both dark-colored. Can't make out much more in the dark. They're staying back about a quarter mile, but they speed up when I speed up and slow down when I slow down. The pattern was familiar. Too familiar. Bartholomew pulled up the GPS tracking for network members in the area. The nearest friendly truck was 40 miles away. Too far to provide immediate assistance. "Kentucky Rose, what's your cargo?" "Pharmaceuticals. High-value load heading to Kansas City." Of course it was. Even with Zebulon's network dismantled, new predators had emerged to fill the void. Crime, like nature, abhorred a vacuum. "Listen carefully," Bartholomew said. "There's a way station about 15 miles ahead of you. It's closed, but there are cameras and good lighting. Head there, but don't pull in. Drive past it, then about a mile later there's an emergency vehicle turnaround. Use it to reverse direction, then come back to the way station. The confusion might buy you time." "Roger that, Guardian Base." Bartholomew was already moving, grabbing keys to one of their response vehicles, a modified pickup with reinforced bumpers and an engine that could outrun most anything on the road. He called Temperance as he ran to the vehicle. "We've got an active situation on Highway 50. Young driver being stalked. Pharmaceuticals load." "How far out are you?" 20 minutes if I push it." "That might be too long. I'll redirect Keisha, but she's 30 minutes minimum." Bartholomew started the engine, tires squealing as he pulled out. "Tell Kentucky Rose to keep talking to me. The sound of another voice might help keep them calm." The 20-minute drive felt like hours. Bartholomew pushed the pickup to its limits, engine screaming as he flew down the dark highway. He kept talking to Kentucky Rose. Real name turned out to be Marcus, kid from Louisville trying to make enough money to pay for college. "I did the turnaround like you said," Marcus reported, his voice shaking. "But they followed me through it. They're still there." "How close?" "Closer than before. Maybe 50 yards." They were escalating, getting ready to make their move. Bartholomew pressed harder on the accelerator, watching the speedometer climb past 90. "Marcus, I need you to stay calm. Help is coming. When you get to the way station, pull in but keep your engine running. Park under the brightest lights you can find. What if they follow me in? Then you be ready to move. Your truck loaded heavy?" "Yeah, about 70,000 pounds. "Good. That's your weapon if you need it. Anybody tries to approach your cab, you put it in gear and you move. Don't worry about property damage." Through the radio, Bartholomew heard Marcus's breathing quicken. "They're moving up. Oh God, they're coming alongside me." "Which side?" "Both sides. They're boxing me in." Bartholomew was still 10 miles out. Too far. Marcus, listen to me. You're going to have to do something that goes against every instinct. When I tell you, I want you to hit your brakes hard. Not enough to jackknife, but hard enough to surprise them. I don't know if I can. You can. Trust me. On 3, 1, 2, 3. The sound of squealing brakes filled the radio, followed by Marcus's panicked breathing. It worked. They shot past me, but they're turning around. Good. Now floor it. Get to that way station. Bartholomew crested a hill and finally saw lights ahead. The way station and the distinctive running lights of a semi pulling into it. But he also saw other lights, 2 sets, converging on the location. He grabbed his phone, dialing 911 while driving. This is Bartholomew with the Highway Protection Network. We have an attempted hijacking in progress at the way station on Highway 50, mile marker 163. Armed suspects, driver in danger. The dispatcher started asking questions, but Bartholomew dropped the phone, focusing on driving. He was 5 miles out when he saw Marcus's truck in the way station, the 2 pickups circling it like wolves. Marcus, I'm 3 minutes out. Whatever happens, don't leave your cab. One of the pickups suddenly rammed Marcus's trailer, trying to disable it or force him to stop. The kid did exactly what Bartholomew had taught him. He put the truck in gear and started moving, using the massive vehicle as both shield and weapon. Bartholomew came into the way station at 70 miles per hour, laying on the horn. The 2 pickups scattered, not expecting intervention. He sideswiped one, sending it spinning into the scale house. The other tried to flee, but Marcus, finding his courage, swung his trailer wide, clipping the pickup's rear end and sending it into the ditch. Both vehicles were disabled, their occupants stumbling out, disoriented. Bartholomew positioned his pickup between them and Marcus's truck, standing on the running board with his concealed carry weapon visible but not raised. On the ground, now! Maybe it was his tone, or maybe they realized their plan had failed catastrophically, but all 4 men, 2 from each pickup, complied. They lay face down on the cracked asphalt as sirens became audible in the distance. When the state troopers arrived, they found Bartholomew and Marcus standing guard over the would-be hijackers. The criminals were arrested, the pharmaceuticals were safe, and another predatory crew was off the roads. As the scene was being processed, Marcus approached Bartholomew. The kid was young, maybe 22, with hands that still shook from the adrenaline. "You saved my life," Marcus said. "How did you know what to do?" Bartholomew looked at the young driver, seeing something of himself from years ago, that innocence about to be tempered by harsh reality. "Because I've been where you were, and someone saved me once, too." "Temperance?" "I've heard the stories. Her and others. The road's full of dangers, Marcus, but it's also full of guardians. You just have to know how to recognize both." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Could I be part of this? The network? I want to help others the way you helped me. Bartholomew smiled. The network was growing, each saved driver potentially becoming another protector. Talk to me after you've got a few more years under your belt. This work isn't for everyone, but the fact that your first instinct is to help others, that's a good sign. Over the following months, the incident with Marcus became another story in the network's growing legend. The pharmaceuticals turned out to be insulin and other critical medications headed to hospitals. The hijackers had inadvertently threatened countless lives beyond just Marcus's. The arrested men eventually gave up information about their operation, leading to more arrests. It turned out they were part of a new syndicate trying to fill the void left by Zebulon's organization. But unlike Zebulon's military precision, these were opportunists, violent but disorganized. Temperance called Bartholomew to a meeting a week after the Marcus incident. They met at a truck stop in Nebraska, sitting in a booth like any other pair of truckers grabbing coffee. "The FBI wants to make our network official," she said without preamble. "Bring us in as consultants. Give us resources. Legitimacy." Bartholomew stirred his coffee, thinking. "And you said no. How did you know?" "Because the moment we become official, we become visible, accountable, restricted by regulations and jurisdictions." He looked at her. "The network works because we're ghosts. We appear when needed, disappear when we're not." Temperance smiled. "Exactly what I told them. But they're not happy about it. They want control over what we're doing." "Let them want. We're not breaking any laws. We're just drivers, helping drivers. They might make things difficult for us." Bartholomew shrugged. "Things are already difficult. At least this way we're difficult on our own terms." A year passed. The network grew. Bartholomew found himself training new members, teaching them the signs to watch for, the tactics hijackers used, the ways to intervene without getting killed. He developed protocols, response strategies, communication codes. Some of the truckers called them the Ghost Riders, protectors who appeared out of nowhere when danger struck. Others called them Guardian Angels. Bartholomew didn't care about the names. He cared about the results. They didn't save everyone. Sometimes they were too far away, or the intelligence came too late. Bartholomew attended 3 funerals that year, drivers who'd been killed by hijackers before help could arrive. Each death was a failure, a reminder that the network, for all its growth, couldn't be everywhere. But for every failure, there were a dozen successes. Drivers saved, hijackers arrested, cargo delivered safely. The word spread through truck stops and CB radios. If you were in trouble, call for Guardian Base. Someone would answer. 2 years after the incident with Marcus, Bartholomew received an unexpected call. It was Samuel, his former trainee, now an experienced driver himself. "Bartholomew, I've got something strange. I'm training a new driver, and she mentioned something about her brother. Says he drives a truck, told her stories about a Guardian network that helps drivers in trouble." Lots of people have heard the stories by now. "Yeah, but she said her brother's name is Zebulon Marsh." Bartholomew's blood went cold. "That's impossible. Zebulon's in federal prison." "Not the same Zebulon. This is Zebulon Jr., the son. Of course, the sins of the father inherited by the son." "What else did she say?" "That's the thing. She's scared of him. Says he blames someone named Bartholomew for destroying his family. She doesn't know I know you, doesn't know I'm connected to the network." "Where are you now?" "Eastbound on I-70, about 50 miles from Denver." "And the woman?" "Sleeping in the berth. But Bartholomew, I think she's bait. I think her brother sent her to get hired by trucking companies, looking for anyone connected to you." It was clever, Bartholomew had to admit. Use family members to infiltrate trucking companies, gather intelligence, identify network members. The son learning from the father's mistakes. "Samuel, I need you to act normal. Complete your run. Don't let her know you suspect anything. We'll handle this carefully." "What are you going to do?" "What we always do. Protect the innocent and stop the predators, even when the predator is the son of an old enemy." Bartholomew called an emergency meeting of the network's core members. They gathered at the abandoned depot that served as their headquarters. A dozen men and women who'd become the unofficial guardians of America's highways. Temperance listened to the intelligence, her expression grim. If Zebulon Jr. is following his father's playbook, but learning from his mistakes, he's more dangerous. He knows about us now, knows we exist. "He's hunting us while we're hunting him," Keisha added, using his sister as an unwitting spy. "Or maybe she's not unwitting," another member suggested. "Maybe she's fully complicit." Bartholomew shook his head. "Samuel says she seemed genuinely scared. We can't assume guilt, but we can't ignore the threat either." They developed a plan. They would feed false information through Samuel, let the sister report back to her brother, make him think he was learning their weaknesses when really they were setting a trap. It took 3 weeks of careful manipulation. The sister, whose name was Rebecca, gradually revealed more about her brother's operation. He had a crew of young men, all with family members who'd been arrested in the federal raids. They wanted revenge, but more than that, they wanted to rebuild the empire. The final confrontation came on a cold October night, 3 years almost to the day since Bartholomew's first encounter with hijackers. Zebulon Jr. thought he was ambushing a network meeting at a truck stop in western Kansas. Instead, he drove into a carefully orchestrated trap. FBI agents, alerted by Temperance through back channels, were waiting. The arrest was clean. No violence, no dramatic chase. Just handcuffs clicking shut and rights being read while Bartholomew watched from the shadows. Rebecca was there too, brought by Samuel as a witness. When she saw her brother being arrested, she broke down crying. Not from sadness, but relief. She'd been trapped, forced to help him through threats against their mother. With him in custody, she was finally free. As the federal agents drove away with Zebulon Jr. and his crew, Temperance stood beside Bartholomew in the parking lot. "Think that's the end of it?" she asked. "No, there'll always be another threat. Another predator. The roads are too long, too lonely, too full of vulnerable targets." He watched a truck pull out of the lot, heading into the night. "But we'll be here too, watching, protecting. For how long? You could have had a peaceful retirement." Bartholomew thought about his small apartment, his abandoned garden plans, the quiet life he'd once wanted. Then he thought about Marcus, about Samuel, about Rebecca, and all the drivers who just wanted to do their jobs and go home safe. "For as long as it takes," he said. "The road gave me my life. Now I give my life to protecting it." 5 years later, Bartholomew finally stepped back from active operations. His knees couldn't handle the long hours anymore, and his reflexes had slowed. But he didn't leave the network. Instead, he became its historian and trainer, documenting procedures, teaching new members, maintaining the communication systems. The network had grown beyond anything he'd imagined. Hundreds of drivers, former law enforcement and civilian volunteers spread across the country. They had safe houses at major truck stops, emergency response vehicles stationed along dangerous corridors, and a communication system that rivaled official law enforcement. Marcus, the young driver he'd saved years ago, had become one of the network's most effective operators. Samuel ran training programs for new truckers, incorporating safety and awareness training that had probably saved dozens of lives. Even Rebecca had joined, using her inadvertent inside knowledge to help identify potential threats. Bartholomew's last active operation was escorting a high-risk pharmaceutical shipment through Colorado. Nothing happened. The mere presence of network vehicles was enough to deter any potential hijackers. It was almost anticlimactic, but Bartholomew realized that was the point. The network's greatest success wasn't in the dramatic rescues, but in the crimes that never happened because predators knew the Guardians were watching. On his official last day, Temperance organized a gathering at a truck stop in Kansas. Dozens of drivers showed up, people whose lives had been touched by Bartholomew's courage and dedication. They didn't make speeches or hand out awards. They just shared coffee and stories, trucker to trucker, guardian to guardian. As the sun set over the plains, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, Bartholomew stood outside watching trucks roll by on the highway. Each one represented a life, a family, depending on that driver making it home safe. Temperance joined him, both of them silent for a moment. "Any regrets?" she finally asked. "No," Bartholomew said without hesitation. "That night on Highway 50, when those Suburbans came for me, I could have died. Everything since then has been extra time, and I've used it to make a difference. You've saved dozens of lives, directly and indirectly. We all have. That's what the network is. Not heroes, just people looking out for each other." A truck horn sounded in the distance, that lonely sound that had defined so much of Bartholomew's life. But now it didn't sound lonely to him. It sounded like a voice in a conversation, truckers signaling to each other across the darkness that they weren't alone. Bartholomew would continue to work with the network from home, monitoring communications, coordinating responses, training new members via video calls. His body might have retired from the road, but his spirit remained out there on the highways, watching over the drivers who kept America moving. The hijacking attempts continued, would always continue as long as there was valuable cargo to steal, but now the predators knew they weren't hunting helpless prey. Now they knew about the guardians in the shadows, the network of protectors who could appear at any moment. And somewhere out on Highway 50, where it all began, a memorial stood at the site of that first attack. Not an official monument, just a simple marker placed by grateful truckers. It read, "For those who watch over us on the long roads, for those who answer when we call, for the guardian angels of the highway." Bartholomew never visited the memorial. He didn't need to. His memorial was in every truck that made it safely home, every driver who lived to see another sunrise, every predator who thought twice because they knew the guardians were out there. The road had tried to kill him once. Instead, it had given him a purpose that transformed his final years from a quiet retirement into something legendary. He'd become exactly what that unknown pickup driver had been for him all those years ago, a guardian angel appearing in the darkness when all seemed lost. And as he sat in his small apartment, listening to the scanner, ready to coordinate another rescue if needed, Bartholomew knew that his story would continue through others. The network would grow, evolve, adapt to new threats. The guardians would keep watching. Because on the lonely highways of America, where predators hunted in the darkness between cities, there would always be a need for guardian angels. And as long as that need existed, the network would be there, invisible but present, ready to answer when a frightened driver called out for help in the night. The road never ends. Neither does the watch. Phineas had been driving trucks across the Great Plains for 12 years when he first saw the hitchhiker on that cold November morning in 2019. The sun was just breaking over the horizon, painting the Nebraska farmland in shades of gold and amber, when he spotted the figure standing at the junction of Highway 281 and a gravel access road about 30 miles south of Grand Island. At 45 years old, Phineas had developed certain rules about hitchhikers. Company policy said never pick them up, insurance liability, and all that. Common sense said the same thing. These days, anyone standing on the side of the road with their thumb out was either desperate, dangerous, or both. But something about this particular figure made him ease off the accelerator and take a longer look as he approached. The man was tall, maybe 6'2", wearing a long brown coat that looked like it belonged in an old Western movie. His hair was dark, shoulder length, and despite the early morning hour, he wore sunglasses that reflected the rising sun like mirrors. He stood perfectly still, not waving his arms or making any effort to flag down traffic. Just standing there with his thumb extended, patient as a scarecrow. Phineas drove past without stopping, but something made him glance in his side mirror. The hitchhiker had turned to watch the truck pass, and for just a moment Phineas could have sworn the man smiled. Not a friendly smile, not a disappointed grimace at being passed by, but something else. Something that made Phineas unconsciously press harder on the accelerator. He forgot about the hitchhiker by the time he reached his delivery point in Kansas City. The load of agricultural equipment was offloaded without incident, and Phineas grabbed lunch at a truck stop diner, called his dispatcher, a perpetually stressed woman named Magnolia who'd been with the company for 20 years, and got his next assignment. Electronics shipment heading back north to Sioux Falls. Good-paying run, mostly highway miles. It was late afternoon when he headed back north on the same route, the autumn sun already starting its descent toward the western horizon. As he approached that same junction where he'd seen the hitchhiker that morning, Phineas found himself scanning the roadside. Empty. Just brown grass and the occasional piece of wind-blown trash. He laughed at himself for even looking. 3 days later, Phineas was running a different route. Highway 183 through central Nebraska, hauling frozen goods in a refrigerated trailer. It was around midnight, that dead time when the radio goes quiet and the only company is the white noise of tires on asphalt. He was reaching for his thermos of coffee when his headlights swept across a familiar figure. The same hitchhiker, same brown coat, same sunglasses despite the darkness, same patient stance with thumb extended. Standing at a crossroads nearly 100 miles from where Phineas had first seen him. This time, Phineas slowed down enough to get a better look. The man's face was pale, almost luminescent in the headlights with sharp cheekbones and a thin-lipped mouth. He didn't look homeless or stranded. His clothes, while unusual, appeared clean and well-maintained. There was no backpack, no sign that suggested a traveler, just the man himself, standing at the crossroads like he was waiting for something specific, or someone specific. As Phineas passed, the hitchhiker raised his other hand in a small wave, not desperate or pleading, but casual, almost friendly. Like he was saying, "See you next time." Phineas grabbed his CB radio, switching to channel 19. Breaker 19, this is Midwest Phantom northbound on 183. Anybody else seeing this hitchhiker out here? Tall guy in a brown coat? Static whispered back for a moment. Then a voice crackled through. Midwest Phantom, this is Knight Rider, about 10 miles behind you. Yeah, I saw him. Weird-looking dude. Been seeing him all week at different spots. Never in the same place twice. All week? Where else? Saw him on Highway 14 near Aurora 2 nights ago. Before that, junction of 30 and 281. Always at crossroads, always at night. Gives me the creeps. Another voice joined the conversation. This is Dakota Dream. I picked him up once. Phineas felt his hands tighten on the wheel. You picked him up? What happened? There was a long pause, then Dakota Dream's voice came back, quieter. Nothing happened. That's what was weird. He sat in complete silence for 50 miles. Never said where he was going, never said thanks when I let him out, just pointed to a crossroads and nodded when we got there. But boys, I had nightmares for a week after. Kept dreaming about crossroads and choices I'd made wrong. Did he threaten you? Phineas asked. No, nothing like that. He just sat there, but it felt like he was studying me, learning me. When he got out, he said one thing, "You're not the one." Then he was gone. The conversation died after that, each driver retreating into their own thoughts. Phineas tried to shake off the unease, focusing on the road, the schedule, anything but the image of that pale face and those mirror sunglasses. A week passed without incident. Phineas ran his regular routes, Omaha to Denver, Denver to Wichita, Wichita back to Omaha. He didn't see the hitchhiker, didn't even hear chatter about him on the CB. Started to think maybe the guy had moved on, found whatever he was looking for. Then came the night that changed everything. It was the last week of November, the night before Thanksgiving. Phineas was hauling a load of frozen turkeys from a processing plant in Norfolk, Nebraska, heading south to distribution centers in Kansas. The weather had turned nasty. Not quite snow, but a freezing drizzle that made the roads slick and visibility poor. He was on Highway 81, about 20 miles north of York, when he saw the accident. Two cars tangled together in the median, steam rising from crumpled hoods, hazard lights blinking weakly. Phineas immediately started slowing down, reaching for his phone to call 911. That's when he saw him. The hitchhiker was standing beside the wreck, that brown coat unmistakable even in the rain. But he wasn't helping the accident victims. He was just standing there, watching, like a spectator at some grim theater. As Phineas's truck approached, the hitchhiker turned and looked directly at him. Even through the rain and darkness, even with those sunglasses, Phineas felt the weight of that gaze. The hitchhiker raised his thumb. Every instinct told Phineas to keep driving. Call 911, report the accident, but don't stop, don't engage. But there were people in those cars who might be hurt, might be dying. He couldn't just drive by. He pulled onto the shoulder about 50 yards past the accident, grabbed his emergency flashlight and first aid kit, and jogged back through the freezing rain. The hitchhiker hadn't moved, still standing there like a statue. "Are they okay?" Phineas called out as he approached. "Has anyone called for help?" The hitchhiker didn't respond, just stood there with that slight smile. Up close, Phineas could see his own reflection in those sunglasses, distorted, stretched, somehow wrong. Phineas moved past him to the first car. The driver, a middle-aged woman, was conscious but bleeding from a cut on her forehead. "Help is coming," Phineas told her, though he hadn't actually called yet. "Just stay still." The second car held a young couple, both dazed but seemingly uninjured. Phineas was checking them for signs of shock when he realized the hitchhiker had moved. He was now standing directly behind Phineas, close enough that he could feel the man's presence like a cold weight. "You're the one," the hitchhiker said. His voice was soft, cultured, with an accent Phineas couldn't quite place. "I've been waiting for you, Phineas." Phineas spun around, his heart hammering. "How do you know my name?" The hitchhiker's smile widened. "I know many things. I know you drive these roads 5 nights a week. I know you eat at the Flying J near Grand Island every Tuesday. I know you call your dispatcher Magnolia every evening at 6 to check in. I know you've been driving for 12 years, 3 months, and 16 days. Have you been following me? Stalking me?" Following suggests movement. I've simply been waiting at the crossroads where our paths would intersect. The hitchhiker removed his sunglasses, revealing eyes that were completely black. Not dark brown, not dilated pupils, but black from edge to edge, like pools of oil. "Every driver on these roads eventually comes to a crossroads, Phineas. A moment of choice. Yours is approaching." Phineas backed away, his hand moving instinctively to the knife he kept on his belt. "Stay away from me." The hitchhiker laughed, a sound like wind through dead leaves. "I'm not going to hurt you, Phineas. That's not my purpose. I'm simply here to observe, to witness, to ensure you make the choice you're meant to make." "What choice? What are you talking about?" But the hitchhiker had already turned away, walking back toward the highway. "You'll know when the moment comes, and I'll be there to see it." Sirens became audible in the distance. Phineas looked toward the sound, and when he turned back, the hitchhiker was gone. Not walking away, not hiding in the darkness, simply gone, as if he'd never been there at all. The state troopers and paramedics arrived minutes later. The accident victims were treated and transported, their injuries thankfully minor. When the trooper took Phineas's statement, he mentioned seeing a man at the scene, but didn't elaborate on the conversation. How could he explain eyes like pools of oil and knowledge no stranger should have? He drove the rest of his route in a daze, delivered the turkeys on schedule, and headed home for Thanksgiving. But even surrounded by the warmth of family, the normalcy of turkey and football and pumpkin pie, Phineas couldn't shake the hitchhiker's words. Your crossroads is approaching. The next week, Phineas tried to return to his routine, but everything felt different. Every intersection felt significant, every decision weighted with invisible importance. He started seeing the hitchhiker everywhere. A glimpse in a truck stop mirror, a figure in his peripheral vision that disappeared when he turned to look, always at the edge of sight like a shadow that moved independently of its source. Other drivers started reporting strange experiences, too. A driver named Carl said he'd picked up a hitchhiker matching the description, but when they reached the destination, his passenger seat was empty, though the door had never opened. Another driver, a woman named Betty, swore she'd seen the hitchhiker at 3 different locations simultaneously. Impossible, unless there were multiple people in identical clothes, or unless the rules of physics didn't apply. Magnolia called Phineas one evening, her usually stressed voice carrying an additional edge of concern. Phineas, I need to ask you something strange. Have you been picking up hitchhikers? No, why? I've been getting calls. 3 different drivers say they've seen you with a passenger. Same description every time, tall man in a brown coat. But your logs show you running solo. Phineas felt a chill run down his spine. I haven't picked up anyone, Magnolia, I swear. I believe you, but something weird is happening. Be careful out there, okay? Maybe take a different route for a while. So Phineas did. He switched to running Interstate 80 instead of the smaller highways, stayed away from the isolated crossroads where the hitchhiker seemed to appear. For a week, it worked. No sightings, no strange dreams, no feeling of being watched. Then came the night of December 15th. Phineas was hauling a load of industrial equipment from Council Bluffs to North Platte, fighting through the first real snowstorm of the season. Visibility was down to maybe 30 feet, the wind pushing his trailer sideways with every gust. He should have pulled off, found a truck stop to wait out the weather, but he was behind schedule and Magnolia had emphasized how important this delivery was. He was crawling along at 25 miles per hour when he saw the lights in his mirror. A vehicle coming up fast, way too fast for the conditions. Phineas moved as far right as he safely could, hoping the idiot would pass and become someone else's problem. But the vehicle, a black SUV from what he could tell, didn't pass. It pulled alongside him and matched his speed. Through the passenger window of the SUV, Phineas could see a face. The hitchhiker, no longer in his brown coat but wearing modern clothes, was driving the SUV and looking directly at him. The hitchhiker pointed ahead urgently, mouthing a single word, "Stop." Phineas's first instinct was to ignore him, to keep driving, but something in the hitchhiker's expression, actual concern, maybe even fear, made him hit the brakes. His truck slowed, the trailer fishtailing slightly in the snow, and came to a stop. Seconds later, barely visible through the snow, a massive pileup materialized out of the white. A dozen vehicles tangled together, completely blocking the highway. If Phineas had continued at his current speed, he would have plowed right into it. The black SUV had vanished. When Phineas looked around, heart still pounding from the near miss, he saw the hitchhiker standing beside his truck, back in the brown coat, those black eyes reflecting the emergency lights that were starting to appear through the snow. Phineas rolled down his window. "You saved me." "No," the hitchhiker said. "You saved yourself by choosing to trust. That was your first crossroads." "First, how many are there?" "3. Always 3. The second comes soon." The hitchhiker started walking backward into the snow, fading into the white. "And Phineas, when it comes, remember, the obvious choice isn't always the right choice." Emergency vehicles arrived, working to clear the pileup. It took 3 hours before traffic could move again. During that time, Phineas sat in his cab trying to process what had happened. The hitchhiker had saved his life, but why? What did he mean by 3 crossroads? When he finally delivered his load and called Magnolia to report the delay, she was unusually quiet. Then she said, "Phineas, I need to tell you something. That load you're carrying, it's not just industrial equipment. There are sealed containers in there with medical supplies, experimental drugs for a children's hospital in Denver. If they don't get them in the next 12 hours, 3 kids on the transplant list won't make it. Why didn't you tell me?" "Company policy. We're not supposed to inform drivers about medical cargo. Too much pressure. Too much liability if something goes wrong. But with this weather, with the delays, I thought you should know. You need to make a choice. The safe route will take too long. The dangerous route through the mountains might get you there in time." The second crossroads. Phineas looked at the 2 possible routes on his GPS. The safe route followed the interstate, longer but maintained and monitored. The dangerous route cut through secondary roads in the mountains, shorter but in this weather, potentially deadly. He thought about the hitchhiker's words. The obvious choice isn't always the right choice. The obvious choice was to take the safe route, preserve his own life, follow company protocol, avoid unnecessary risk. But 3 children were depending on medicine he was carrying. He turned toward the mountains. The next 6 hours were the longest of Phineas's career. The mountain roads were ice-covered, with visibility near zero and drop-offs that meant certain death if he miscalculated a turn. 3 times he had to stop and chain up, his fingers numb from the cold. Twice he felt the trailer start to jackknife and had to perform controlled corrections that left him shaking with adrenaline. But he made it, rolled into the hospital loading dock with 2 hours to spare. The medical staff was waiting, rushed the containers inside. Later, Magnolia told him all 3 children had received their treatment successfully. "You could have died," she said. "That was incredibly reckless. Maybe, but it was the right choice." There was a pause. "Phineas, I've been doing some research. Other dispatchers in the company have been reporting similar things. Drivers seeing a strange hitchhiker, making unusual decisions that turn out to save lives. It's like someone or something is guiding certain drivers to be where they need to be. You think I'm crazy? No. I think something bigger than us is happening on these roads. Be careful, Phineas. If there really are 3 crossroads, you've got 1 more coming." The 3rd crossroads came 2 weeks later, just before Christmas. Phineas was deadheading, driving with an empty trailer, back from a delivery in Rapid City. It was a clear night, stars brilliant in the winter sky, the kind of peaceful drive that reminded him why he'd chosen this profession. He was on Highway 385, about 50 miles from the Nebraska border, when he saw the car broken down on the shoulder. It was an old sedan, hood up, hazard lights blinking. A family stood beside it. A man, a woman, and 2 young children, all bundled against the cold. The man was waving desperately as Phineas approached. Everything about it felt wrong. The car looked too conveniently disabled. The family was positioned too perfectly in his headlights. It was the exact kind of setup he'd been warned about in trucker safety meetings. Criminals using fake breakdowns to get drivers to stop in isolated areas. But as he got closer, he saw the children's faces. A boy and a girl, neither more than 10, genuinely shivering in the cold. Their fear wasn't manufactured. He started to slow down, and saw movement in his peripheral vision. The hitchhiker was standing on the opposite side of the road, watching. Not gesturing, not indicating what choice to make, just observing. This was it. The third crossroads. Phineas could keep driving. It was the safe choice, the smart choice. Don't stop for strangers on isolated roads, especially when something feels off. But those children. He pulled over. The moment his truck stopped, everything changed. The man's desperate expression morphed into something harder. He reached into his coat, and Phineas knew with absolute certainty he was going for a weapon. This was an ambush. But before the man could draw whatever he was reaching for, the hitchhiker appeared beside him, simply materialized out of the darkness. Those black eyes seemed to pull in the light from the stars themselves. "No," the hitchhiker said to the man. One word, but it carried weight that seemed to press down on everything around them. The man froze. His family froze. Even the wind seemed to stop. "This one has chosen correctly 3 times, the hitchhiker continued. He chose to trust when logic said not to. He chose to risk his life for children he'd never met. And now he's chosen compassion over safety. He is protected." The hitchhiker turned to the family. "Leave. Now. And know that if you ever attempt this again, on any driver, on any road, I will find you, and I am not always merciful." The family scrambled into their suddenly working car and sped off into the night. Phineas sat in his cab, hands shaking, watching as the hitchhiker approached his window. "Who are you?" Phineas asked. "What are you?" The hitchhiker smiled, and for the first time it seemed genuinely warm. "I have many names. Crossroads Guardian, Road Watcher. Some of your fellow drivers have started calling me Cornelius, though that's not quite right. I exist to test those who travel these paths. Most fail. They choose safety over righteousness, self over sacrifice. But a few, like you, prove that humanity still has heroes." This was all a test? Life is a test, Phineas. Every choice, every crossroads determines who we truly are. You've proven yourself 3 times. Now you're under my protection. The roads will be kinder to you. Dangers will pass you by. And when your time finally comes to leave these highways, it will be peaceful. What about the family? Were they real? Real enough. Desperate people making bad choices. They would have hurt you, perhaps killed you, if I hadn't intervened. But you couldn't have known that for certain when you chose to stop. That's what made it a true test. The hitchhiker, Cornelius, started to fade like a morning mist. "We won't meet again, Phineas, but I'll be watching, and when you see other drivers facing their crossroads, remember, sometimes the greatest danger is in not taking the risk to help." After that night, Phineas's life on the road changed in subtle but unmistakable ways. Traffic seemed to part for him during rush hours. Weather that hammered other drivers would clear just as he approached. Way stations that were stopping every truck would wave him through without inspection. It was as if the road itself had accepted him as one of its own. But with this strange protection came an awareness he hadn't possessed before. He started noticing things. Other drivers in distress, dangerous situations developing before they became critical, and occasionally, just at the edge of his vision, figures standing at crossroads who shouldn't be there. Not Cornelius, but others like him perhaps, watching, waiting, testing. It was 3 weeks after his final encounter with Cornelius when Magnolia called him with unusual urgency in her voice. "Phineas, I need you to take a special run. I know you're supposed to be off for the next 2 days, but this is important." "What's going on?" Remember that weird hitchhiker situation you told me about? Well, one of our drivers is missing. A young guy named Timothy, only been driving for 6 months. His last check-in was 3 days ago on Highway 283 in Nebraska. His truck's GPS went dark shortly after. You think it's connected to the hitchhiker? Magnolia paused. Timothy's mother called our office, said he'd called her the night he disappeared, talking about a man in a brown coat who kept appearing at different places along his route. Said the man knew things about him, personal things. She said Timothy sounded terrified. Phineas felt his blood chill. That doesn't sound like Cornelius. He was strange, even frightening, but not malicious. That's what worries me. What if there are others like him, but not all of them are benevolent? Phineas was already reaching for his keys. Send me Timothy's last known location. I'll head out there now. Phineas, be careful. I'm not supposed to tell you this, but Timothy isn't the first driver to go missing recently. There have been 4 others across different companies, all last seen on remote highways in Nebraska and Kansas. All reported seeing a hitchhiker before they vanished. The drive to Timothy's last known location took Phineas through the night and into the gray dawn of a winter morning. Highway 283 was desolate, even by Great Plains standards, cutting through endless fields of dead corn stalks and abandoned farmhouses that stood like tombstones against the horizon. He found Timothy's truck about 5 miles from where the GPS had cut out, pulled off on a side road that led to an abandoned grain elevator. The rig was intact, no signs of struggle or accident. The driver's door was open, keys still in the ignition, Timothy's wallet and phone on the seat. But Timothy himself was gone. Phineas examined the scene carefully. There were footprints in the dust leading away from the truck toward the grain elevator, but they were strange. Too long, too deep, as if whoever made them was carrying something heavy. Or someone. He followed the tracks to the base of the elevator, a massive, concrete structure that had been abandoned for at least a decade. The loading doors were chained shut, rust bleeding down the walls like dried blood. But there was a smaller door on the side, and it was ajar. Inside, the elevator was a cavern of shadows and decay. Grain dust particles floated in the shafts of light that penetrated through holes in the roof. The air smelled of rot and something else, something organic and wrong. "Timothy," Phineas called out, his voice echoing in the vast space. A sound came from above, footsteps on metal. Phineas looked up to see a figure descending the internal ladder. For a moment, he thought it was Cornelius, but as the figure emerged into a patch of light, he realized it was someone else entirely. This hitchhiker wore the same style of brown coat, but his was stained and torn. His hair was wild, unkempt, and his eyes were black like Cornelius's, but where Cornelius's had been deep and measuring, these were hungry, predatory. "Another driver," the figure said, his voice rough like gravel. "How delightful. I was just finishing with young Timothy." "Where is he?" Phineas demanded, his hand moving to the knife on his belt. The hitchhiker laughed, a sound that made Phineas's skin crawl. "Above. 3rd level. Still breathing if you hurry, but you won't hurry. You'll stay here with me, and we'll discuss your choices, your crossroads, all the moments where you could have been more than just a driver. You're not like Cornelius." The hitchhiker's expression darkened. Cornelius, that sanctimonious guardian, always testing, always judging, always protecting those he deems worthy. But what about those who fail his tests? What about those who choose wrong at their crossroads? Someone has to collect them. Collect them? Every road has 2 directions, driver. Cornelius guides those who choose correctly. I take the others. The ones who choose self-preservation over sacrifice. The ones who drive past accidents without stopping. The ones who see suffering and accelerate. The hitchhiker moved closer, and Phineas could smell something like sulfur and old leather. "Tell me, how many have you passed by? How many times did you choose the easy path before Cornelius found you worthy?" Phineas backed toward the ladder. "I'm taking Timothy and leaving." "No, you're not." The hitchhiker moved with impossible speed, suddenly standing between Phineas and the ladder. "You've been marked by Cornelius, protected. That makes you special. If I can turn you, make you fail a crossroads now, after you've been deemed worthy, well, that would be quite the accomplishment. I won't play your games. Oh, but you already are." The hitchhiker gestured to the ladder. "Young Timothy is dying up there. You can try to save him, but I'll make it difficult, or—" He pulled out a set of keys. "You can take these, get in your truck, and drive away. I'll let you go, no consequences. But Timothy dies. Your choice. Your crossroads." Phineas looked at the keys, then at the ladder. The smart choice was to leave, get help, come back with police. But by then, Timothy would be dead. And despite what the hitchhiker said, Phineas doubted he'd be allowed to simply leave. "You're not giving me a real choice," Phineas said. "Either option serves your purpose." The hitchhiker smiled, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too numerous. "Every choice serves someone's purpose. The question is whose purpose you'll serve." Phineas made his decision. He charged directly at the hitchhiker, not toward the ladder, but at the creature itself. The hitchhiker, surprised, stumbled backward. Phineas grabbed the brown coat and used his momentum to slam the hitchhiker into the concrete wall. "Wrong choice," the hitchhiker snarled, his form seeming to ripple and distort. "You can't fight me." "I'm not trying to fight you," Phineas said, pulling something from his pocket. His phone, which he'd activated to record. "I'm documenting you." The hitchhiker's black eyes widened as he saw the phone. "No. No recordings. That's not allowed." "By whose rules?" Phineas backed away, keeping the phone trained on the hitchhiker. "Cornelius never minded being seen. Only creatures that live in shadow fear the light." The hitchhiker let out a shriek that sounded like tearing metal and launched himself at Phineas. But as he moved, his form began to dissolve, becoming translucent. The phone's simple act of observation, of recording, seemed to be undoing him. "This isn't over," the hitchhiker howled as he faded. "Others will come. The failed ones always need collecting." And then he was gone, leaving only the smell of sulfur and a scorch mark on the concrete floor. Phineas didn't waste time pondering what had happened. He scrambled up the ladder to the third level where he found Timothy. The young driver was unconscious, pale, with strange marks on his neck that looked like frostburn. But he was breathing. It took all of Phineas's strength to carry Timothy down the ladder and back to his truck. He called 911, then Magnolia, then sat with Timothy until the ambulance arrived. The paramedics said it looked like severe hypothermia, though the temperature hadn't been below freezing. Timothy recovered, though he had no memory of what happened after he stopped to investigate what he thought was an abandoned vehicle. The other missing drivers were never found, and Phineas didn't want to think about what that meant. Magnolia arranged for Phineas to meet with investigators, but when he showed them the video from the grain elevator, all it showed was shadows and dust. The hitchhiker, whatever he truly was, didn't show up on the recording. "Maybe some things aren't meant to be documented," the lead investigator said, though his expression suggested he'd seen unexplainable things before. After that incident, Phineas started carrying more than just his phone. He kept salt in his truck. Old trucker superstition said it was protection against evil. He had a small mirror attached to his keychain, another bit of folklore about revealing true forms. And he started paying closer attention to the stories other drivers told at truck stops. There were more hitchhikers out there. Some, like Cornelius, seemed to test and protect. Others, like the one in the grain elevator, preyed on drivers who made the wrong choices or simply had the bad luck to stop in the wrong places. And then there were stories of others. Hitchhikers who offered deals, who promised shortcuts that led nowhere good, who left drivers changed in ways they couldn't quite explain. A month after the Timothy incident, Phineas was running his regular route when he got an unexpected passenger. Not a hitchhiker, but Magnolia herself, who decided she needed to understand what was happening to her drivers. "I've been dispatching for 20 years, she said, settling into the passenger seat with obvious discomfort. She wasn't used to being in trucks, just directing them. But in the last year, things have gotten strange. Drivers disappearing, others reporting impossible things, and then there's you. What about me? Your delivery rate has improved by 30%. You never hit bad weather. You never get stopped for inspection. It's like you've got a guardian angel." "Or a guardian hitchhiker," Phineas muttered. They were passing through western Nebraska when Magnolia saw her first crossroads figure. It wasn't Cornelius or the malevolent one from the grain elevator, but a woman in a faded dress standing at the intersection of two county roads. She was young, maybe 20, with long blonde hair that moved in a wind that wasn't blowing. "Do you see her?" Magnolia whispered. "I see her. Don't look directly at her. Some of them take that as an invitation." "Some of them? How many are there?" "No one knows for sure, but the old-timers at truck stops tell stories. They say the highways have always had watchers. Spirits, demons, angels, whatever you want to call them. They're drawn to the crossroads, to the places where decisions are made." They passed the woman without incident, but Magnolia was pale. "This is insane. This can't be real." "Real is relative out here," Phineas said. "The important thing is knowing how to navigate it. Most hitchhikers won't bother you if you don't engage. The dangerous ones, well, you learn to recognize the signs." "What signs?" "They appear in multiple places too quickly. They know things they shouldn't. They're too perfect or too wrong, never quite human, and they always appear at crossroads, never on straight stretches of road." As if summoned by the conversation, a figure appeared ahead. But this one was different. It was Cornelius standing in the middle of the road, hand raised in a stop gesture. Phineas immediately hit the brakes. "Something's wrong. Cornelius said we wouldn't meet again." The truck came to a stop 20 feet from where Cornelius stood. The hitchhiker approached, his black eyes reflecting the headlights like mirrors. "Phineas," he said, his voice carrying despite the distance. "And the dispatcher Magnolia. Good, I need to warn you both." "Warn us about what?" Phineas called out. "The one you encountered at the grain elevator. He was just a scout. There are more coming. They're angry that you saved Timothy, that you've been teaching other drivers how to protect themselves." Cornelius moved closer, and Magnolia gasped at the sight of his eyes. "They're going to target your company specifically. Every driver you dispatch, Magnolia, will be at risk." "Why our company?" Magnolia asked, finding her voice. "Because you're fighting back. Because Phineas has shown others that these things can be resisted. Because your drivers are starting to carry protections, share information, look out for each other." Cornelius smiled slightly. "You're disrupting the natural order. Some of us approve. Others do not." "What can we do?" Phineas asked. "Adapt, evolve. The old protections help. Salt, iron, mirrors, recordings. But the best protection is community. Drivers watching out for each other, sharing information about dangerous areas, never leaving anyone alone on dangerous routes." Cornelius started to fade. "And Phineas, you're going to face another test soon. Not from me, but from them. They want to break you, to prove that even the protected can fall. Be ready." He vanished, leaving Phineas and Magnolia alone on the empty highway. "We need to warn everyone," Magnolia said, already pulling out her phone. "Every driver in our fleet. They won't all believe you. Then we'll make believers out of them. Training seminars, new safety protocols, whatever it takes." She looked at Phineas. "You're going to help me. You've been through this, survived it. The drivers will listen to you." So began a strange new chapter in Phineas's career. By day, he continued his regular routes. By night, he worked with Magnolia to develop what they called the Crossroads Protocol, a set of guidelines for dealing with unusual situations on remote highways. They distributed mirrors to every driver, for checking blind spots, officially, but really for revealing true forms. They mandated that all trucks carry salt, for dealing with ice, they said, though the real reason was different. They installed new GPS trackers that couldn't be disabled easily, and they instituted a buddy system for dangerous routes. Some drivers thought it was excessive, paranoid even, until they started encountering the hitchhikers themselves. The reports came in slowly at first. A driver named Marcus saw a figure that appeared at 3 different intersections within minutes. Another driver, Sarah, picked up what she thought was a stranded motorist, only to have them vanish from her cab mid-conversation, leaving only the smell of sulfur. A team driver pair reported being followed by the same hitchhiker for over 200 miles, always maintaining the exact same distance. But the protocols were working. Drivers were escaping situations that might have ended badly. They were protecting each other, sharing information, refusing to be isolated victims. Then came the night of January 15th, exactly 2 months after Cornelius's warning. Phineas was hauling a load of agricultural equipment through Kansas, the temperature well below freezing, when his CB radio crackled to life with a desperate call. "Emergency! Emergency! This is Silver Dollar on Highway 183, mile marker 47. They're surrounding me. Multiple hitchhikers all around my truck." Phineas recognized the voice. A young woman driver named Janet, who just started 3 months ago. He was only about 10 miles from her location. "Silver Dollar, this is Midwest Phantom. I'm coming to you. Keep your doors locked and your mirrors visible. They're on my truck. On the roof. On the hood. Oh God, their faces." The transmission cut to static. Phineas pushed his truck harder, engine roaring through the frozen night. He called Magnolia, who immediately started vectoring other drivers toward the location. But Phineas knew he'd get there first. When Phineas arrived at mile marker 47, the scene that greeted him defied rational explanation. Janet's truck was stopped in the middle of the highway, hazard lights blinking in a rhythmic pattern that seemed almost hypnotic. But it was what surrounded the truck that made Phineas's blood run cold. There were at least 7 figures circling the vehicle, all in variations of that brown coat he'd come to associate with the hitchhikers. But these weren't moving like humans. They flowed around the truck like smoke, sometimes solid, sometimes translucent, their faces shifting between human features and something far more disturbing. Hollow sockets where eyes should be, mouths that opened too wide, expressions of hunger that belonged on no living thing. Janet was visible in the cab, pressed against the driver's seat, holding up a small mirror that seemed to be keeping the creatures at bay. Every time one got close to the windows, the reflection would make it recoil with a sound like steam hitting ice. Phineas didn't hesitate. He'd learned from his encounter at the grain elevator that these things, whatever they were, had rules they had to follow. He grabbed his emergency kit. Salt, mirrors, his phone set to record, and something new he'd added after talking with an old trucker at a rest stop. An iron crowbar that had been blessed by 3 different religious leaders. He also activated the new emergency broadcast system Magnolia had installed in all company trucks. Code black at mile marker 47 on Highway 183. Multiple hostile entities. Driver in immediate danger. All available units respond. The responses came immediately. Big Thunder, 8 minutes out. Kansas Wind, 12 minutes. Night Rider, 15 minutes. Phineas stepped out of his truck, the crowbar in one hand, his phone recording in the other. The hitchhikers immediately noticed him, 3 of them peeling away from Janet's truck to approach him. "The protected one," they said in unison, their voices overlapping like a broken echo. "You should not have come." "Let her go," Phineas said, his voice steadier than he felt. "She's not part of whatever grievance you have with me. Everyone is part of it now," the lead hitchhiker said. This one was more solid than the others, more defined. Phineas recognized him as the one from the grain elevator, somehow returned despite seeming to dissolve. "You've taught them to resist, taught them to protect themselves. The harvest has become difficult. Harvest, souls, driver, decisions, choices, every crossroads creates energy, and we feed on the ones who choose poorly. But your kind has learned to choose better, to help each other. You're starving us." "Good," Phineas said, moving closer to Janet's truck. "Maybe you should find a different food source." The hitchhiker laughed, that terrible sound of tearing metal. "Oh, we will, starting with you and everyone you've taught. Tonight, we break the protection Cornelius placed on you. Tonight, you fail your final test." They rushed him simultaneously, moving with that impossible flowing motion. Phineas swung the iron crowbar and it connected with the first hitchhiker with a sound like a thunderclap. The creature shrieked and dispersed into smoke, but reformed moments later, angrier and more distorted. The second hitchhiker grabbed Phineas's arm, and immediately he felt a cold that went beyond temperature. A draining sensation, like something vital was being pulled from him. He pressed his phone against the creature, the recording light blinking, and again it recoiled. But the third one was smarter. It went for his tools, knocking the phone from his hand, scattering the salt he'd been reaching for. Phineas was down to just the crowbar and his own determination. That's when he heard the horns. Not just one, but multiple. The cavalry was arriving early. Big Thunder's freightliner came roaring up, high beams blazing, and the driver, a mountain of a man named Jim, jumped out carrying what looked like an industrial-sized salt spreader, the kind used for icy roads. He started firing it at the hitchhikers, and where the salt hit them, they sizzled and pulled back. Kansas Wind arrived next, driven by the wife and husband team of Amy and Carl. They had mirrors mounted all over their truck, turning it into a rolling disco ball of reflections. The hitchhikers couldn't even look at it directly. More trucks arrived. Night Rider, Desert Rose, Steel Phoenix. Within minutes, there were 8 big rigs forming a circle around Janet's truck, their lights creating a barrier of illumination that the hitchhikers seemed unable or unwilling to cross. But the creatures weren't retreating. They were waiting. "You think your lights and salt will save you?" the lead hitchhiker called out. "You think your community makes you strong? Let us show you what real power looks like." The temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds. Frost spread across the truck's windshields despite their running engines. The lights flickered, dimmed, and for a moment, darkness threatened to reclaim the circle. That's when Magnolia's voice crackled over everyone's CB simultaneously. "All drivers, execute Protocol 7, now!" Protocol 7 was something Magnolia and Phineas had developed but never tested, a coordinated response using everything they'd learned about these entities. Every driver grabbed their emergency mirror and held it outward. Every truck's horn sounded simultaneously, the combined noise creating a wall of sound that made the hitchhikers flinch. And from every cab, drivers threw salt in perfect synchronization. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The hitchhikers writhed, their forms becoming unstable, flickering between solid and smoke. But still, they didn't flee. "Fools!" the lead hitchhiker snarled. "You delay the inevitable. We are eternal. We have haunted these roads since before they were paved, and we will remain long after your dust." That's when another voice cut through the chaos. Calm, measured, familiar. "No, you won't." Cornelius stood at the edge of the circle, but he wasn't alone. Behind him were others, dozens of figures in brown coats, but these radiated a different energy. Where the hostile hitchhikers were hungry and dark, these seemed protective, almost luminous. "The Guardians," someone whispered over the CB. "You've broken the rules," Cornelius said to the hostile hitchhikers. "Attacking en masse, targeting protected individuals, attempting to harvest by force rather than choice. The covenant is broken." "The covenant was already broken when you chose favorites," the lead hitchhiker spat. "When you started actively protecting them. I protect those who prove themselves worthy through their choices. You prey on anyone vulnerable. That is the difference between us." Cornelius stepped forward, and the hostile hitchhikers actually backed away. "Leave now, or face judgment." "This isn't over, Cornelius. The roads are changing. The old ways are dying. Soon there won't be enough choices, enough crossroads to sustain any of us. What will you do then?" "Adapt," Cornelius said simply, "as the worthy always have." The hostile hitchhikers let out a collective shriek that shattered 2 windshields, then dissolved into smoke that was caught by the wind and scattered across the plains. Within moments, there was no sign they'd ever been there except for scorch marks on the asphalt and the frost on the trucks. Janet finally emerged from her cab, shaking but unharmed. The drivers gathered around her, offering comfort, checking she was okay. But Phineas approached Cornelius, who was standing apart from the other guardians. "Why did you really come?" Phineas asked. "This wasn't just about saving us." Cornelius smiled sadly, perceptive as always. "You're right. The hostile one spoke truth about one thing. The roads are changing. Autonomous vehicles, GPS tracking, satellite surveillance. The mystery is leaving the highways, and with it, we're losing our purpose. So, what happens to you? We adapt, as I said. Some of us are learning to exist in new ways, finding crossroads in digital spaces, decision points in virtual realms. Others," he gestured to where the hostile hitchhikers had vanished. "Others refuse to change and become more desperate, more dangerous. And you? I'm investing in humanity. In people like you who understand that the crossroads isn't about the physical intersection, it's about the choice. Every moment of decision is a crossroads, whether it's on a highway or in a hospital or at a computer screen." Cornelius looked at the assembled drivers. "You've all chosen to protect each other. That creates a different kind of energy, one that sustains guardians like myself. So we're feeding you? In a way, but it's symbiotic. We protect, you choose rightly. The energy of those good choices strengthens us to protect more. It's the opposite of what the hostile ones do. They feed on fear and failure, creating more of both." Magnolia had been listening, having arrived in a company pickup. "How do we know which ones are guardians and which ones are hostile?" "You'll learn," Cornelius said. "The same way you learn to read the weather, traffic patterns, dangerous drivers. It becomes instinct." He started to fade, as did the other guardians. "But remember, not all hitchhikers are us. Some are just people needing help. Don't let fear make you drive past someone truly in need." As the guardians vanished, the drivers stood in a circle, processing what they'd witnessed. Finally, Big Thunder Jim broke the silence. "So, Anyone else thinking we need to update the protocol manual? The tension broke with nervous laughter. They spent the next hour there on that highway, sharing stories, updating each other on what they'd learned, strengthening the bonds that had saved them. Janet, still shaken but finding her voice, asked Phineas, "Does it get easier? Seeing them, dealing with them?" "No," Phineas answered honestly, "but you get stronger, and you're never alone in it." Over the following weeks, the attacks decreased dramatically. Word had apparently spread in whatever realm the hitchhikers inhabited that this particular company's drivers were protected, organized, and not easy targets. Other companies started reaching out to Magnolia, wanting to know about their safety protocols, their success rate in keeping drivers safe. Magnolia, with Phineas's help, started an informal network, the Crossroads Coalition. They shared information about dangerous routes, suspicious patterns, protection methods that worked. They couldn't go public with the truth. Who would believe them? But they could teach practical safety measures that happened to also work against supernatural threats. The coalition grew. Trucking companies across the Midwest joined, their drivers trained in the subtle art of recognizing and avoiding the dangerous hitchhikers while still helping real humans in need. They developed a classification system. Type A, guardians like Cornelius, generally benevolent but still to be treated with caution. Type B, hostile entities that fed on fear and poor choices. Type C, neutral entities that seemed more curious than dangerous. Type D, unknown or unclassified. They also developed response protocols for each type, ways to protect oneself without escalating confrontation. The iron and salt worked on Type B. Mirrors revealed true forms of all types. Recording devices caused most to retreat, or at least behave less aggressively. 6 months after the mass attack, Phineas was training a new batch of drivers in Crossroads Protocol when one of them, a young woman named Patricia, raised her hand. "This is all pretty hard to believe," she said. "Supernatural hitchhikers? Guardian spirits? It sounds like trucker ghost stories." Before Phineas could respond, the temperature in the training room dropped noticeably. Every driver's breath became visible, and on the whiteboard behind Phineas, words appeared as if written by an invisible hand. Some stories are true. The writing faded as quickly as it had appeared. The temperature returned to normal, and Patricia didn't ask any more skeptical questions. That night, Phineas was driving his regular route when he realized he was being followed. Not by hostile hitchhikers, but by another truck maintaining perfect distance behind him. After 30 miles of this, his CB crackled. "Phineas, this is Cornelius." Phineas nearly drove off the road. "You're driving now?" "Adapting, remember? I've taken corporeal form temporarily. I need to show you something." They pulled off at the next rest stop. The truck Cornelius was driving looked normal enough, though Phineas noticed it had no company logos, no DIOT numbers, nothing identifying at all. Cornelius led him to a picnic area behind the rest stop, away from other drivers. "The coalition you've built is working better than you know. The hostile ones are struggling, some are even converting, choosing to become guardians rather than predators. That's good, right?" "Yes, but it's also causing upheaval in our realm. There are those who believe the old ways should be preserved, that humans and our kind should remain separate. They're planning something." "Another attack?" "No, something more subtle. They're going to try to discredit your coalition, make you all look insane. Staged incidents, manipulated footage, whispered rumors. They want to destroy the trust you've built." "How do we stop them?" Cornelius smiled. "By being exactly what you are. Good people, making right choices. Truth has a way of surviving lies, especially when it's backed by consistent action. Keep protecting each other. Keep teaching others. Keep choosing correctly at every crossroads. That's it? That's your advice? Sometimes the simplest path is the strongest, but also... Cornelius pulled out what looked like an old CB radio, its surface etched with symbols that seemed to shift when Phineas looked at them directly. Keep this in your truck. If things get truly dire, use Channel 13 and say Crossroads Emergency. It will summon help. Guardian help? The best kind of help. Drivers who faced their tests and passed, living and otherwise. The fellowship of the road extends beyond what you might imagine. Phineas took the radio, feeling its unusual weight. Why are you helping us so much? Because in all my existence watching these roads, I've rarely seen humans organize against the darkness so effectively. You're not just surviving encounters. You're building community, creating light where there was shadow. That deserves protection. As Cornelius returned to his impossible truck and pulled back onto the highway, Phineas stood in the rest stop, pondering everything that had happened since that first sighting over a year ago. His life had become something he never could have imagined. Part trucker, part protector, part teacher of impossible realities. His phone buzzed with a message from Magnolia. 3 new companies want to join the coalition. Also, Timothy from the grain elevator incident wants to become an instructor. Says he owes it to others to share what he learned. When can you meet with them? Phineas smiled. The network was growing. The light was spreading. Whatever the hostile entities planned, they would face it together. The fellowship of the road, as Cornelius had called it, was stronger than any individual threat. He climbed back into his truck, placed the strange CB radio carefully in his emergency kit, and pulled back onto the highway. Somewhere out there, at crossroads yet unseen, other drivers were facing their tests. Some would pass, some would fail, but increasingly they wouldn't face them alone. The road stretched endlessly ahead, full of dangers both mundane and supernatural. But it was also full of guardians, both human and otherwise, watching over those who traveled through the night. And Phineas was proud to be among them. The sabotage began subtly, just as Cornelius had warned. It started with edited videos appearing on social media, footage of truckers talking about hitchhiker protocols, but manipulated to make them sound delusional. A driver explaining the salt protection became, through clever editing, a ranting conspiracy theorist talking about demon possession. A safety meeting about mirror placement was recut to look like a cult gathering. Magnolia called Phineas at 3 a.m., her voice tight with stress. "We've got a problem. 3 companies just pulled out of the coalition. They're saying we're making their drivers paranoid that we're spreading mass hysteria. The hostile ones are moving against us, just like Cornelia said they would. It's worse than that. The Department of Transportation is launching an investigation into our unsafe practices. They're particularly concerned about drivers carrying unauthorized items like blessed crowbars and industrial salt spreaders." Phineas sat up in his sleeper berth, fully awake now. They can't shut down basic safety equipment. They can if they frame it as mental health concerns. There's talk of mandatory psychological evaluations for any driver who reports seeing unusual hitchhikers. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Discredit the witnesses, pathologize the protectors, and the highways would once again become hunting grounds for the hostile entities. "We need to call a gathering," Phineas said. "Every driver in the coalition. This weekend at the old truck stop on Highway 281. That place has been closed for 2 years. Exactly. No cameras, no outsiders, just us and whoever else shows up." That weekend, over 200 drivers converged on the abandoned truck stop. They came in convoys watching each other's backs, mirrors, and salt at the ready. As the sun set over the Nebraska plains, Phineas stood on the hood of his truck to address the crowd. "They want us divided," he called out. They want us questioning ourselves, questioning each other. But everyone here knows the truth. We've seen them, we've faced them, we've protected each other from them. A younger driver named Marcus raised his hand. But what if they're right? What if we're just seeing things because we expect to see them? Mass hysteria is a real phenomenon. Before Phineas could respond, the temperature plummeted. Every breath became visible. The abandoned truck stop's old neon sign flickered to life. Impossibly, since the power had been cut years ago. And in that stuttering light they appeared. Dozens of them. Not just the hostile ones, but guardians too. Type C neutrals, and others that didn't fit any category they'd established. They stood at the edges of the gathering, visible to all, undeniable in their presence. Cornelius stepped forward from among the guardians. You wanted proof of your sanity. Here it is. We show ourselves to all of you together, so there can be no doubt. The lead, hostile hitchhiker emerged from his group, that same one Phineas had encountered multiple times. This proves nothing. They'll say it was mass hallucination, group psychology, a shared delusion. Then we'll give them something that can't be explained away, Cornelius said. He raised his hand, and every truck in the lot, all 200 plus, started simultaneously. Not just the engines, but the radios, all tuning to the same frequency, all playing the same message. We are the watchers at the crossroads. We have existed as long as humans have faced choices. We are not your enemies unless you make us so. We are not your friends unless you earn it. We simply are, and we witness. The message repeated in dozens of languages recorded on hundreds of phones. But when the drivers later tried to play back the recordings, they would find something interesting. The message was different for each person, personalized, containing information only they would know. Undeniable proof that something beyond mass hysteria had occurred. The hostile hitchhiker snarled. You break our laws, Cornelius. Direct intervention, mass revelation, the consequences are mine to bear, Cornelius interrupted. These humans have earned the right to know they're not insane. They've built something unprecedented, a network of protection that spans thousands of miles. They deserve the truth. What happened next would be debated in truck stops for years to come. The hostile entities and the guardians faced each other across the lot, tension building like the air before a tornado. Then, from the crowd of drivers, someone started singing. It was Janet, the young driver who'd been surrounded just months before. She sang, "This land is your land," her voice shaky but growing stronger. Other drivers joined in. A song every American knew. A song about roads and traveling and belonging. The effect on the entities was immediate. The hostile ones writhed as if in pain, while the guardians seemed to grow more solid, more present. By the second verse, half the drivers were singing. By the third, it was everyone. The lead hostile hitchhiker screamed, a sound that shattered windshields and set off every car alarm for miles. This isn't over. The roads belong to us. They've always belonged to us. No, said a new voice. It was Timothy, the driver Phineas had saved from the grain elevator. He stepped forward, still bearing the frost scars on his neck. The roads belong to whoever travels them with purpose, and our purpose is to help each other get home safe. The hostile entities retreated, dissolving into smoke that was pulled apart by the prairie wind. But before the lead one vanished completely, he locked eyes with Phineas. You've won this battle, but the war continues. Every crossroads, every choice, will be waiting, and one day, you'll choose wrong. Maybe, Phineas replied, but not today, and not alone. The entity vanished with a final shriek. The Guardians remained a moment longer. Cornelius approached the gathered drivers. "You've done something remarkable. You've created your own protection, your own light in the darkness. We'll continue to watch, to guard when needed, but you don't need us as much as you think. The real protection comes from each other." He turned to Phineas specifically. "The radio I gave you, you won't need it for summoning help. Use it to coordinate, to build. The Fellowship of the Road is yours to shape now." With that, the Guardians faded, leaving 200 drivers standing in an abandoned truck stop, forever changed by what they'd witnessed. The investigation by the Department of Transportation found nothing actionable. The videos of the mass gathering showed only truckers having what appeared to be a safety meeting. The personalized messages on their phones were dismissed as an elaborate prank, though no one could explain how it was accomplished. More importantly, the attacks on drivers virtually ceased. Word had spread in whatever realm the hostile entities inhabited. These roads were protected. The drivers were organized, alert, and united. Easier prey existed elsewhere. The Crossroads Coalition not only survived but thrived. It evolved from a defensive network into something more, a true fellowship. Drivers helped each other not just with supernatural threats, but with everyday challenges. Breakdowns, difficult dispatchers, family emergencies. The network responded to all of it. Magnolia was promoted to regional director, her success with driver safety earning recognition even if the true reasons remained hidden. She used her new position to spread the coalition's practices wider, always couched in terms of conventional safety and mental health support. A year after the gathering at the abandoned truck stop, Phineas was training a new group of drivers when one asked, "Do you still see them, the hitchhikers?" "Sometimes," Phineas admitted, "but it's different now. The hostile ones keep their distance. The Guardians appear occasionally, usually just to observe. And sometimes I see new ones, entities that seem curious about what we've built." "Are you ever afraid?" "Fear isn't the opposite of courage. It's a component of it. Yes, I'm afraid sometimes, but I'm never afraid alone. That makes all the difference." His phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. When he opened it, there was just a single line of text. "Third crossroads completed. The fourth is yours to define. See." Phineas smiled. Cornelius was still watching, still testing, but now the tests were different. They weren't about individual choices at isolated crossroads. They were about building something larger, creating a network of light that made the darkness retreat. 3 months later, Phineas was approached by a documentary filmmaker who'd heard rumors about the coalition. She wanted to tell their story, the real story, not the sanitized version they gave to officials. "People won't believe it," Phineas warned her. "Maybe not, but those who need to hear it will. Every industry, every profession has its shadows. Maybe showing how you've dealt with yours will help others do the same." The documentary was never picked up by major networks, but it spread through streaming services and truck stop DVDs. It became required viewing for new coalition members, a reminder that the impossible was just another challenge to overcome together. On a cold December night, exactly 3 years after his first sighting of Cornelius, Phineas was driving through Nebraska when he saw a familiar figure at a crossroads. The tall man in the brown coat, sunglasses despite the darkness, thumb extended. This time, Phineas stopped. Cornelius climbed into the passenger seat, solid and present in a way he'd never been before. "I wanted to thank you," Cornelius said simply. "For what?" "For showing us another way. The hostile ones are learning that fear isn't the only energy that sustains. Some are converting, becoming guardians. Others are finding different paths entirely. The roads are changing because you changed them. We just did what truckers do. Looked out for each other." Cornelius smiled. You did more than that. You proved that humanity doesn't need us to define your crossroads. You're capable of creating your own, of choosing paths we never imagined. They drove in comfortable silence for 50 miles. As they approached another crossroads, Cornelius spoke again. This is where I leave you. But Phineas, remember, every end is a beginning. The fellowship you've built will outlast all of us. It will evolve, adapt, face new challenges, but its core will remain. Drivers protecting drivers. Light pushing back darkness. Choices made in community rather than isolation. Will I see you again? Every time you help another driver, every time you choose correctly at a crossroads, you'll see me. Maybe not this form, but the essence of what I represent. The guardian that exists in every person who chooses to protect rather than prey. Cornelius stepped out of the truck and walked to the center of the crossroads. He raised his hand in farewell, then simply faded into the darkness. But it wasn't a disappearance. It was a dispersal, spreading out along every road that led from that intersection. Phineas sat there for a moment, engine idling, watching the empty crossroads. Then his CB crackled to life. Breaker 19, this is Lost Lamb, southbound on 281. My engine's making a weird noise and I'm scared to stop out here alone. Anyone nearby? Phineas grabbed the mic. Lost Lamb, this is Midwest Phantom. I'm 5 miles from you. Find a safe spot to pull over and keep your doors locked. I'm coming to you. Thank God. I heard about you guys, the Coalition. Is it true you help anyone who calls? That's what we do, Phineas said, already turning his truck around. No one drives alone on our watch. As he headed toward the stranded driver, Phineas thought about all the crossroads ahead. Personal, professional, supernatural, and mundane. Each one a choice. Each choice defining who they were and who they would become. The Coalition now had chapters in 12 states. The mysterious hitchhiker sightings had dropped by 80%. Drivers were safer, both from conventional and unconventional threats. They'd built something that transcended the original threat, creating a community that would endure long after the last hitchhiker faded from the roads. 5 years later, when Phineas finally retired from driving, he didn't leave the Coalition. He became its historian and trainer, teaching new generations of drivers about the crossroads they'd face. Some students believed every word about the supernatural encounters. Others thought they were metaphors for the choices and challenges of the road. It didn't matter which they believed, as long as they learned the core truth. Together, they were stronger than any darkness. On his final official day as a driver, Phineas took one last run down Highway 281. At every crossroads he thought he saw a figure standing watch, sometimes in a brown coat, sometimes in modern clothes, sometimes just a shimmer in the air. Guardians all, watching over the roads they'd helped make safe. His CB crackled one final time as he pulled into his home terminal. It was Magnolia, now running the Coalition's national operations. Phineas, we just got word. The DOT is officially recognizing our safety protocols. They're recommending them industry-wide. We did it. No, Phineas corrected. We're doing it. Present tense. The work never really ends. The eternal crossroads? Something like that. Every day, every choice, every mile of road. We keep watching, keep protecting, keep choosing right. As he parked his truck for the last time, Phineas saw something in his mirror. A figure in a brown coat, standing by the terminal gate. But when he turned to look directly, it was just another driver, headed out for a night run, CB antenna bobbing, mirrors gleaming, salt container visible on the dashboard. The fellowship of the road continued. That night, Phineas had a dream. He was standing at a massive crossroads. not of highways but of light, beams stretching in every direction, each one a path taken by a driver he'd trained, helped, or saved. The network spread beyond the horizon, an interconnected web of protection and purpose. Cornelius stood beside him in the dream, looking at the same view. "This is what you built," the Guardian said. "Not just safety protocols or corporate coalitions, but this, a living network of human courage and compassion. What happens to it now? It grows. It evolves. It faces new challenges as the roads change, as technology advances, as the world shifts. But the core remains. People helping people, light defeating darkness, the eternal choice at every crossroads to be better than our fears." When Phineas woke, he found a message on his phone from an unknown number. It was coordinates, a crossroads in Montana where 3 drivers had recently reported strange sightings. The coalition was already responding, but they wanted his expertise. Retirement, it seemed, would have to wait. The road was calling, and when the road called, the fellowship answered. Together, always together, choosing the right path at every crossroads, creating light in the darkness 1 mile at a time. In the end, that's all any of us can do. Face our crossroads with courage, help others face theirs, and trust that together we're stronger than whatever waits in the shadows. The hitchhikers still appear on remote highways, standing at crossroads with their thumbs extended. Some are hostile, some are guardians, some are simply observers of the endless human drama playing out on asphalt rivers. But they all know now. These roads are protected by something more powerful than any supernatural entity. They're protected by ordinary people who chose to be extraordinary when it mattered most. The fellowship of the road endures. 10 years passed. The Crossroads Coalition had become something none of them could have imagined. A nationwide network with international connections, officially recognized by the Department of Transportation, unofficially known among truckers as the only real protection against things that shouldn't exist but did. Phineas, now in his late 50s, ran the Coalition's training center in Nebraska. It was built, perhaps not coincidentally, at a major crossroads where 5 highways met. The building itself was modern, efficient, filled with the latest safety equipment and training simulators. But everyone who worked there knew about the sub-basement room that nobody talked about in official reports. The one with walls lined with mirrors, circles of salt permanently embedded in the floor, and iron fixtures on every door. It was a Thursday morning when everything changed again. Magnolia, now head of national operations, called him directly. Her voice had that edge he'd learned to recognize. Something significant had happened. "Phineas, we've got a situation. Remember that documentary about us from 5 years ago? The one that barely anyone watched? Well, someone watched it. Someone important. The CEO of Continental Logistics just called. They've been having incidents. 12 drivers missing in the last month, all on the same route through Wyoming. Local authorities are baffled. The CEO wants to hire us as consultants. Officially, full disclosure, hazard pay, and complete autonomy in how we handle it. Phineas, this could change everything. If we succeed here, we become legitimate. No more hiding what we do, no more coded language in our reports." Phineas was quiet for a moment, thinking. What kind of incidents? Different from our usual. Drivers aren't seeing hitchhikers. They're seeing other trucks, identical to their own, down to the license plates. The double follows them for miles. Then, at some point, the driver realizes they're following themselves. When they try to confront the double, both they and their original truck vanish. That's new, and outside our expertise. But here's the thing. 3 of the missing Continental drivers had our training. They knew the protocols, carried the protections. Whatever this is, it's adapted to our methods. Phineas stood up, pacing his office. Through the window he could see new trainees practicing emergency maneuvers in the yard. Young faces, eager and unaware of how deep the darkness could go. "I'll take a team," he said. "Timothy, Janet, Marcus. They've all faced different types of encounters. We'll need variety and experience." "There's one more thing," Magnolia added. "Continental's CEO, a woman named Margaret Sterling, she says she's been having dreams. The same dream every night for 2 weeks. She's standing at a crossroads in Wyoming, and there's someone waiting for her there. Someone in a brown coat." Phineas felt a chill. Cornelius. Or something pretending to be him. Either way, she says the dream always ends the same way. The figure tells her that the Fellowship of the Road has failed its final test. The team assembled within 24 hours. Timothy, still bearing his frost scars but now one of their best investigators. Janet, who'd developed an uncanny ability to sense hostile entities before they manifested. Marcus, whose 3-year study of crossroads patterns had revealed migration routes for various entity types. And Phineas carrying the strange CB radio Cornelius had given him years ago. They drove in convoy to Wyoming, taking the exact route the missing drivers had traveled. It was beautiful country. Mountains, forests, endless sky. But there was something wrong with it, too. The shadows fell at strange angles. Birds flew in patterns that made no sense. And every crossroads they passed felt watched. It was Janet who noticed it first. "We're being paced," she said over the CB. "Check your mirrors." Behind them, maintaining perfect distance, was another convoy. 4 trucks identical to theirs, down to the license plates and DOT numbers. But the windows were dark, too dark to see the drivers. "Protocol 7, Marcus suggested. "No," Phineas said. "This isn't like the others. Pull over at the next rest stop. All together. Nobody alone." The rest stop was deserted, despite being midday. They parked in a defensive formation, watching as their doubles pulled in behind them. For 10 minutes, nothing happened. Then the door of the duplicate Phineas's truck opened. What stepped out looked like Phineas, but wrong. The features were perfect, the clothes identical, but the eyes were like looking into an abyss. Not black like Cornelius's, but empty, as if nothing existed behind them. The other doubles emerged from their trucks, perfect copies, all wrong in the same indefinable way. The Phineas double spoke, its voice exactly matching his but devoid of any emotion. "You have protected the roads for 10 years. You have built a fellowship that spans the nation, but you have forgotten the first rule of the crossroads." "What rule?" Phineas asked. "Every choice creates a shadow. Every path taken leaves a path untaken. Every person saved leaves someone unsaved. We are your shadows, the accumulation of all the choices you didn't make, all the drivers you couldn't save." Timothy stepped forward. "You're not real. You're some kind of manifestation, an entity trying to—" His double interrupted. "We are more real than you know. Every time you succeeded, we were created from your failure to fail. Every light you kindled cast us as shadows. And now, after 10 years, we have gained enough substance to act." "What do you want?" Janet demanded. Her double smiled, an expression that looked deeply wrong on features meant to be Janet's. "To complete the pattern. You exist, therefore we must exist. You save, therefore we must condemn. Balance must be maintained." "That's not how it works," Phineas said. "Cornelius never mentioned—" "Cornelius," all 4 doubles said in unison, "is gone. Dispersed, as he chose to be, spread so thin across the roads that he cannot intervene. The Guardians have withdrawn, the hostile ones have retreated, and that has left a vacuum. We are what fills it. Marcus pulled out his phone, trying to record, but the screen showed only static. The salt in his pockets had turned black. The mirrors they carried reflected nothing where the doubles stood. "Your protections don't work on us," Marcus's double said. "We know them all. We are born from them. Every ward you created gave us form. Every protocol you established gave us rules to exist within." That's when Phineas remembered the CB radio Cornelius had given him. Channel 13, he'd said, for emergencies. He reached into his truck, grabbed the radio, and switched to Channel 13. "Crossroads emergency," he said clearly. "This is Phineas at the Wyoming rest stop, Highway 287, mile marker 156. Crossroads emergency." The doubles laughed, a sound like echoing hollowness. "No one is coming. That frequency is dead. The fellowship you built stands alone now." But Phineas kept the channel open, and after a moment he heard something. Not voices, but a sound like wind through wheat fields, like tires on an endless highway, like every truck engine that had ever run these roads humming in harmony. Then they came. Not trucks, but drivers. Hundreds of them, more. Some were solid, clearly alive, having heard the call and responded. Others were translucent, wavering. Drivers who had passed on but remained connected to the fellowship. They came from every direction, surrounding the rest stop, creating a circle of humanity around the shadows. Among them, Phineas saw faces he recognized. Drivers they'd saved, drivers they'd trained, drivers who'd died protecting others. And at the front, visible but not quite solid, was the dispersed essence of Cornelius, pulled back together by the emergency call. "You're wrong," Cornelius said to the doubles. "They don't stand alone. The fellowship extends beyond the living, beyond the physical. Every choice that saved a life created not a shadow, but a light that persists." The doubles faced the assembled fellowship, and for the first time, they showed emotion. Uncertainty. "This is impossible," Phineas's double said. "The dead don't return. The dispersed don't reform." "They do when the cause is sufficient," Cornelius replied. "And you, shadows, have made a fundamental error. You believe you are the opposite of the fellowship, but you're not. You're part of it. The shadow cast by a light source is still defined by that light." Timothy understood first. "They're not our enemies. They're our responsibility." His double turned to him. "What?" "Every choice we didn't make, every driver we couldn't save, they weigh on us. You're our guilt, our regret, given form. But that doesn't make you evil. It makes you part of our journey." Janet stepped toward her double. "All the times I wondered if I could have done more, saved more, been better. That's you, isn't it?" Her double nodded slowly, the emptiness in its eyes filling with something else. Sadness, perhaps, or understanding. Marcus addressed his shadow. "You exist because we're not perfect. Because we're human and limited and can't save everyone. But that's not a failure, it's reality." Phineas looked at his own double, seeing in those empty eyes every trucker he'd passed by before he knew about the hitchhikers. Every call for help that had come too late. Every moment he'd chosen his own safety over another's need before Cornelius had tested him. "You're right," he told his shadow. "You are real. You're the weight we carry, the knowledge that we can't save everyone. But you're not our opposite. You're our reminder of why we keep trying." The doubles stood frozen, processing this. Then, slowly, Phineas's shadow spoke. "If we're part of you, not opposed to you, then what is our purpose?" "To keep us honest," Phineas said. to remind us that the fellowship isn't about being perfect. It's about trying, failing, learning, and trying again. You're not shadows. You're teachers. Something shifted in the air. The oppressive feeling that had haunted the Wyoming route lifted. The doubles began to change, becoming less solid, more integrated with the shadows they cast naturally. The missing drivers, Janet's double said, its voice now carrying emotion. They're at the crossroads where 5 roads meet, 20 miles north. They've been held in stasis, caught between choice and shadow. You can free them now. As the fellowship, living and dead, real and shadow, watched, the doubles walked back to their trucks. But instead of driving away, they simply faded, becoming actual shadows that merged with those cast by the real trucks. Cornelius approached Phineas, his form stabilizing but still translucent. You've passed the true final test, not defeating the shadows but accepting them. The fellowship is complete now, light and dark, success and failure, all part of the same journey. Will you stay? Phineas asked. I can't. I chose to disperse, to become part of every road. But know this, the fellowship you've built doesn't need guardians anymore. You've become your own guardians, complete with your own shadows to keep you balanced. They found the missing drivers exactly where the shadows had said, at a massive crossroads in the middle of nowhere. They were in their trucks, engines running, but frozen in a moment of decision. As the fellowship approached, they awakened, confused but unharmed. The CEO of Continental Logistics, Margaret Sterling, was among them. She'd driven out herself to investigate and gotten caught in whatever phenomenon the shadows had created. I dreamed this, she said to Phineas. I dreamed you would come, that the fellowship would save us. But in my dream, you were different. You were both light and shadow. We are now, Phineas replied. The fellowship isn't just about the light anymore. It's about acknowledging the darkness, too, the failures that make us human. Continental Logistics didn't just hire the Crossroads Coalition as consultants. They integrated them fully, creating the first official corporate recognition of paranormal highway phenomena. It started a domino effect. Within a year, every major trucking company had similar programs. The training center in Nebraska expanded, adding courses not just on protecting against entities but on understanding them, coexisting with them. The shadows had taught them that opposition wasn't always the answer. Sometimes integration was. But the most significant change was in the drivers themselves. They no longer saw the strange encounters as us versus them. The highways had always been liminal spaces between here and there, real and unreal. Now the fellowship embraced that liminality. On quiet nights, drivers would report seeing their shadows driving alongside them, not threatening, just present, a reminder of choices unmade and paths not taken. Some said they'd have conversations with these shadows, learning about themselves, facing their regrets and fears in the safety of their cabs. The hostile hitchhikers became even rarer, not because they were defeated, but because the fellowship had removed what they fed on, not fear itself, but the isolation of fear. When every driver knew they were part of something larger, when even their shadows were integrated into their journey, there was nothing for the hostile ones to exploit. Phineas retired for real 5 years later, at 63. His final drive was on Highway 281, where it had all began. At every crossroads he saw them. Cornelius's dispersed essence, the shadows of choices unmade, the lights of drivers saved, all coexisting in a complex tapestry that had replaced the simple binary of friend and foe. At his final crossroads, he stopped the truck and stepped out. The shadow that emerged from the other side wasn't hostile or empty. It was him, but representing every other life he could have lived if he'd made different choices. Any regrets? His shadow asked. Phineas thought about it. No, every choice led here, to this moment, to this fellowship. The paths not taken made the path I took meaningful. Then our work is done, the shadow said, and for the first time it smiled with genuine warmth. The roads are safe, not because the darkness is defeated, but because the light and dark have learned to travel together. As Phineas drove away from that final crossroads, he saw in his mirrors that his shadow wasn't following. It was riding with him, no longer separate but integrated, complete. The fellowship of the road had evolved into something unprecedented, a community that embraced both its successes and failures, its light and shadows creating a protection network that transcended simple good versus evil. The roads were safer not because the threats were gone, but because the drivers had become complete, carrying their shadows with them as teachers rather than enemies. And at crossroads across the nation, new drivers were learning this truth, that the real test wasn't choosing between light and dark, but learning to drive with both, creating their own path through the eternal twilight of the American highway. The fellowship endures complete now, shadow and light united in the eternal journey home.